Ba, 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 ba. Hey everybody, how you doing? Hey, Milo's over here snurfling about, being a snurf. Uh, it is extremely windy outside. I've got my window a little bit open. I should take this sweater off is what I should do. Let me know if the audio is bad, okay? Let me know if the audio sucks. Because if the audio sucks, then there are things that I can do to improve that. I'm a little bit worried that it's going to be very windy and blustery in the mic, but I hope it's not. But it is quite fierce and forceful. I will also give the warning that because of high wind and because of the bad weather, the chance of the chances of a power outage increase. And so if suddenly I'm like, the CIA has done, and then suddenly everything shuts down, it's probably not because the CIA came and got me. Bex, good to see you. Good to see you on Twitch, my man. Good to see you. Always a pleasure. Are you the same Bex that donated to me and told me about Zhush? I've been looking around trying to find a good Zhush book, and I have an Audible account, but when I type Zhush in, it just gives me the spinny wheel. It's just like, we're searching, we promise. We're looking for Zhush. We're looking for Zhush, we promise. And it's just like nothing happens. So the way that our modern society is going, I really worry that a lot of subtle shitty things happen. I really worry that a lot of subtle shitty things happen to keep. I really worry that a lot of subtle shitty things happen to kind of keep things slow, to get in the way, right? Like, they could very easily program into the system just to slow down a block, a flag of some kind. Okay, I gotta shut this down. This is gonna be bad. In order to just get in the way. Like, some guy's trying to find a book on Zhush, right? Let's slow that down. Let's block that. Let's get in the way. Let's cause problems, right? We don't need to ban it, right? But we can throttle it, I think is really what I'm driving towards. Leon, good to see you. Hope you're well, all things considered, honestly. And Simon on Twitch, good to see you. Yeah, rest in peace, Aaron Bushnell. His protest will be discussed in the history books. It looks like this one is penetrating. It looks like this one is really, really penetrating. And it looks like the initial response from the power structure and from the simps for power, good to see that guy, has very much been, he was obviously suffering from mental illness. He was obviously suffering from this kind of stuff. But anybody who's actually investigating this guy can see very clearly, like, he was part of the United States military, right? They're not going to deploy people who have mental illnesses. Right? They're not going to put people in the command structure who have mental illnesses. That's not how the United States military functions, right? There's literally been Pentagon reports very recently that have said straight out, like, okay, we got a large amount of people who cannot join the military due to mental disorders, right? So the argument that he's just mentally unfit and mentally all this and all that kind of stuff, like, no. He's literally in a system that routinely checks for exactly that kind of thing, specifically so that they don't have people shelling and bombing their own troops due to mental breaks and mental disorders and mental stress, right? This is something the military's been doing since World War I, maybe even earlier than World War I. So it's like the idea that Aaron Bushnell just had a mental snap, right? I don't think that can be taken very seriously at all. I think it's just a form of cope, and that it's a way for people to not actually discuss the very serious reality that Aaron Bushnell is bringing to the table. I will say, straight up, today, I'm in a very black mood. And I've been talking to a lot of people today who are in a very black mood. I can tell that there's like a real darkness going on. Has a new bookshelf. Good to see you. Always remember to like the stream, guys. Always remember to like, share, subscribe, do the stuff. We're fighting an algorithm here. Sven Kier. Don't know if I've ever seen you here before, Sven. Good to see you. Good to see you. Simon says he was a very smart man who had a promising career ahead of him. He was the opposite of mentally ill. Yeah. Everything I've seen about this guy tells me that he was top of the class, that he was right at the top. He was very clever, very intelligent, and I think he was put into a position. There's a document that's been circling around on Twitter. I showed it yesterday. There's a document. I don't know what that means. Has a new bookshelf. Sorry. There's a document that was going around. Showing that he was deployed to Gaza in a mandatory capacity, and that he essentially was choosing between he did what he did in order to not kill innocent people. That's really the long and short of it. That his protest is a protest against his government essentially saying to him, you have to kill children, basically. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. Has a new bookshelf. Why you don't let VOD available for us so we can share? Yeah, I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. VOD means video recording of stream. I ask why you choose not to make it available. If I knew you could do it. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm just a guy, like, I'm a middle-aged man trying to just get a message out into the world, and I don't know what that means, and I don't know how to enable it. So I'll look into it. Has a new bookshelf, for sure I will. Because I would love it if people clipped my stuff. I would love that. But again, like I'm just doing my best out here in the world, right? And I know that there are things that I could do to be sharper and be better. But there's also like me needing to step away for my own mental health and my own mental well-being, right? Like I'm not actually like an obsessive type. I'm not actually like, I'm going to do this 100% of my life and this is what I'm going to do, right? Like I don't think I could be like that, right? Like the goal for me would be to get to a point where I'm making enough money doing this that I could hire somebody to edit these clips and edit things and do that side of the job, because I have tried to do that in the past and I found it to be mentally exhausting. Like I can't do. I don't think I can do all sides of this thing, really, right? Love to have the recordings offline. I mean, you can always come to YouTube and all the recordings are on YouTube, right? And you can get them off of YouTube, right? I'll look into it later. Yeah. Yep. It's all on YouTube, man. Like, search the Canadian Commie on YouTube. It's all right there. It's all right there. Eggs D, good to see you. And YouTube is like traditionally my sort of larger audience and the center of my. It's where all the cool kids are, right? All the cool kids are on YouTube, right? It's where most of the. It's where I get the most viewership. And to be fair, I've been streaming on YouTube for longer. Milo, you've already eaten, man. You're done for the day. No more food. And so I'm in a black mood. I'm in a dark mood. I'm in, like, we are in a moment. I've said this before, but I think it's always worth reiterating and it's always worth talking about. We are in a very, like, black and white kind of a moment. We're in a very, like, it's obvious what is happening. It's very clear what's happening. I don't think it can be debated, right? I think that people are just revealing their position and revealing who it is they are and what it is they're doing. That they're revealing themselves in this moment. Like, I think that this quote from Aaron Bushnell has really crystallized it and made it very real. And this is something I actually said before Aaron Bushnell did what he did. before he martyred himself to this cause. And to hear him say this, in this incredible act, this incredible sacrificial act, really, in my view, crystallizes and makes this the preeminent statement, the only thing that's worth actually saying to people who are in opposition anymore. Because the people who are in opposition, who are pro-genocide, who are pro-Nazi, who are pro-war, still, for whatever reason, believe that they are the good guy, believe that they are in a position of righteousness. And I think that this statement from Aaron Bushnell, many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery, or the Jim Crow South, or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is, you're doing it right now. And I think that that crystallizes the conversation and makes it very clear where people stand. That if you are defending your country while they're committing a genocide, then you know exactly what position you would have been historically. Yeah, infamous images, Biden cynically announcing a ceasefire just before the Michigan election while licking an ice cream cone. Yeah, we'll see how serious that is. I don't think that that's serious. Like, I think that he's just saying things, you know? Like, I don't think he's actually going to do anything materially. These guys are literally passing, like, billions upon billions of dollars of legislation. And, of course, when they talk about ceasefire, like, here we have an article, like, here's how they're framing it, right? And here's how they're going to frame it. This is from the New York Times. So literally the heart of the empire, right? This is the United States empire. This is the CIA. Hamas rejects ceasefire proposal, dashing Biden's hopes of near-term deal. Right? So it's Hamas's fault, right? This is the propaganda system. This is what they're doing. They're having Biden come out and pretend like he cares about a ceasefire, even though Israel confirms it's not true. Good to see you, by the way, Long Defiant. And then, of course, they're trying to pivot and blame it on Hamas. And, of course, the deal is going to be something like, if you give up all your leverage and give up all your territory, then we'll stop shelling you. And that's considered a ceasefire. Right? A day after President Biden suggested there could be a deal as soon as Monday, a Hamas official indicated the group would not trade Israeli troops held hostage for Palestinians imprisoned for terrorism. Like, I love this, right? Would not trade Israeli troops held hostage for Palestinians imprisoned for terrorism, right? You see that trick of language, right? The occupiers are the righteous ones, right? Hamas officials said on Tuesday that there has been no breakthrough in the mediated talks with Israel aimed at pausing the war and freeing the remaining hostages in the Gaza Strip, one day after President Biden said he was hopeful that a ceasefire would take place by next week. Bassem Naim, a Hamas spokesman, said in a text message that the militant group had yet to formally receive any new proposals since senior Israeli officials met with Qatari, Egyptian, and U.S. mediators in Paris last week to advance a possible deal. Another Hamas official, Ahmed Abdelhadi, said the group was sticking to its demand that Israel agree to a long-term ceasefire, and that leaks about the talks were designed to pressure Hamas to soften its position. We are not interested in engaging with what's been floated because it does not fulfill our demands, Mr. Abdelhadi said Tuesday in a televised interview with Al Mayadeen, a Lebanese broadcaster. Qatar, a key mediator in the talks, also expressed caution on Tuesday, saying it could not comment on Mr. Biden's view that negotiators were nearing an agreement. The efforts are ongoing. All the parties are conducting regular meetings. Majid al-Ansari, a spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry, told reporters in Doha. But for now, while we certainly hope it will be achieved as soon as possible, we don't have anything in our hands so as to comment on that deadline. As the Muslim holy month of Ramadan begins in less than 2 weeks, and as the death toll in Gaza approaches 30,000, global pressure has been mounting on Israel to agree to a deal to stop the war, at least temporarily. President Biden, facing his own domestic pressures in an election year, has been pushing for an agreement as soon as possible, telling reporters in New York on Monday that my hope is by next Monday we'll have a ceasefire. Those pressures have led Israel to make significant concessions in the negotiations, two officials said, including an offer to release 15 Palestinians jailed on serious terrorism charges in exchange for 5 female Israeli soldiers being held in Gaza. That offer was part of a broader proposal to exchange scores of Palestinian prisoners and detainees in exchange for about 35 other hostages during a roughly 6-week ceasefire, the officials said. Hamas's political leaders have insisted, at least publicly, that any deal to release the more than 100 hostages still being held in Gaza is dependent on a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops. Israel has said it will not compromise on its goal of toppling Hamas in Gaza, suggesting it will not agree to a long-term truce. Basically just admitting that their goal is to completely cleanse the area. At a news conference in Washington on Tuesday, Matthew Miller, a State Department spokesperson, said that negotiators made significant progress last week and were continuing to push for an agreement between Israel and Hamas. "We are trying to push this deal over the finish line," Mr. Miller said. "We do think it's possible, as we actively fund the occupiers." But he added, "Ultimately, some of this comes down to Hamas. Of course, blame the victim, right? Blame the people you're occupying. Ultimately, some of this comes down to the First Nations people, as we put them on reserves. And whether Hamas is willing to agree to a deal that would provide significant benefits to the Palestinian people that they claim to represent." With no accord in place, the Palestine Red Crescent Society said it had suspended emergency medical missions for 2 days in a part of Gaza where Israeli forces on Sunday intercepted a convoy, evacuating patients from a hospital, interrogating and detaining workers on the suspicion that they were ferrying Hamas fighters. Right, this is what Israel does, right? Everybody's Hamas. Right? If you're a doctor, you're Hamas. If you're a hospital, you're Hamas. Right? You could just bomb and blow up whatever you like and just claim that it's Hamas. Right? And the New York Times is basically just providing cover for this genocide. Just listen to how they're talking about this in the most sterile terms possible. Right? This is your objectivity. This is just sterility, completely pretending like this is anything other than an overt, obvious, manic, crazed, bloodthirsty genocide. The Red Crescent and UN officials said they had cleared arrangements for an evacuation with the Israeli authorities. Jens Lerck, a spokesman for the UN aid office in Geneva, said on Tuesday that Israel had known the details of the route, the vehicles, and the identities of those traveling in the convoy. But after the convoy left Al Amal Hospital in the southern city of Khan Yunis, carrying 24 patients who required surgery, it was stopped by Israeli forces. The soldiers ordered patients and aid workers out of the vehicles, forced paramedics to strip, and held the convoy for 7 hours, UN officials said. One of those detained was released hours later, the Red Crescent said. So basically just terrorizing wounded people, right? Like, holding up their surgery, holding them up in the hopes that they just straight up die, right? This is essentially how Israel operates. Every act that they are doing in the region is a genocidal act at this point, and they're not doing anything, and they're not following any policy of anything other than that. Methane, good to see you. June, demand better, good to see you. In a statement, the Israeli military said that it had stopped the convoy after intelligence raised the possibility that Hamas members were traveling in it. Yeah, intelligence basically just needs to be like, they're Palestinian, right? So they're Hamas, right? So we can just bomb them, right? Are there women and children? We should just bomb it just to be sure. It said it had questioned the Red Crescent workers because of information regarding their possible involvement in terrorist activity. At this stage in the game, if you're not fighting back against Israel, then I think you're just a fucking nut, right? It really is like, imagine watching like Star Wars and trying to pretend like this is a both sides issue, right? Imagine watching like Robin Hood and pretending like, well, Prince John's got some points, right? Imagine like watching like these traditionally very good versus evil stories and trying to pretend as though it's actually complicated, and try to pretend as though there's actually, well, the Empire has a point. The incident led the Red Crescent to announce on Monday that it would suspend missions in areas where it first must arrange its movements with Israeli troops. The group criticized the lack of commitment and respect of the Israeli occupation forces to the procedure and coordination mechanisms agreed upon. Yeah, the Israelis do not keep their word. Right? How many times have they told people, you gotta evacuate to this area, and then bombed that area? Right? They've done it several times now. So they're literally like telling people where to go to be safe, and then purposefully bombing those areas. And now they're just harassing aid groups. They're preventing aid from going in, right? Like, and here the New York Times, at least, like, it's not outright presenting the IDF in these glowing terms, but it's for sure like doing everything it can to provide a sterile cover for all of this. The UN humanitarian teams for the Palestinian territory said the interception of the Al Amal convoy was not an isolated incident. Aid convoys have come under fire and are systemically denied access to people in need, it said in a statement. Humanitarian workers have been harassed, intimidated, or detained by Israeli forces, and humanitarian infrastructure has been hit. Israel has publicized intelligence it says shows Hamas has made use of civilian medical infrastructure, including hospitals, for military purposes. But you guys think everything's Hamas, right? Like, everyone's Hamas. Your leaders have said so, right? Like, your leaders have said so. So it's a worthless thing to say, because everything's Hamas. You can bomb what you like and just say it's Hamas, right? That's what they're doing. It's very obviously what they're doing. And so for us to carry water for this idea, and for us to walk around being like, well, they're trying to root out the bad apples, by murdering women and children, like, as if the process of doing that is not going to generate more resistance. Like, I think that if you're in Gaza, and if you're a Palestinian at all, and you have anything but the desire to pick up a weapon and fight back, that you're fucking crazy. Right? Like, you're like, who is that person? Who's the person who is looking at what's going on being like, well, we really got to consider this is a both sides issue, right? Israel is generating its own enemies, and it's totally going to backfire on them. Underscoring the obstacles to relief efforts on the ground in Gaza, planes from the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and France joined a Jordanian operation to airdrop aid along the coast of Gaza on Tuesday. The Jordanian military said in a statement, it was Egypt's first time airdropping aid into Gaza. Jordanian and French planes previously dropped aid, including ready-made meals, into Gaza on Monday, the Jordanian armed forces said. Video footage on Monday showed a cluster of parachutes falling into the sea near Deir al-Bala, a city in central Gaza. Yeah, wait for them to just start mining that area. Right? Like, that's what the Israelis are going to do. They're just going to start putting, like, mines in the water so that they'll drop aid in the water, and then people will swim out to get it, and then they'll be blown apart by these mines that the Israelis will put in the water. Just mark my words. That shit's going to start happening. These Israelis are psychopaths, right? The Zionists are total psychopaths. Men in small boats paddled out through choppy water to retrieve the aid. As they returned to shore, hundreds on the beach scrambled for packages. It was sad seeing people I know well running and crowding to get aid that's not nearly enough, said Ala Fa'ad, a veterinary student who shot footage of the scene that he posted online. Or they'll just start dropping, like, the Israelis will pretend to drop aid packages as the Egyptians, and the aid packages will actually be bombs. Right? Like, these guys, again, these people are psychos. The aid drop came after the World Food Program last week suspended food deliveries to northern Gaza, saying that despite extreme needs there, it could not safely operate amid gunfire and the collapse of civil order in recent days. The WFP and Other United Nations aid agencies have repeatedly warned that their access to northern Gaza was being systemically impeded by Israeli authorities. Yeah, the Israelites don't want people to come in there and see their genocide, right? Israel has denied blocking aid deliveries. I see. This is the thing about Israel, man. Israel has denied blocking aid deliveries. What do you what? How could you possibly make this claim and expect to be taken seriously? Like, the Zionists are no longer interested. The Zionists are no longer interested in even being perceived as telling the truth, right? They have to know that the world sees them as fraudulent liars. There's no other thing that they could be thinking. Like, it's just unbelievable. Bethany Johns comes into the chat. I've never seen you in here before, Bethany. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Strong first comment. The United Nations visited Ontario in 1997, was horrified by the level of homelessness. Read about it. Yep. I don't know if I've read that on stream, Bethany, but I've definitely talked about it before. So, yeah, like literally every single time any organization of any sort comes to Ontario and takes a look at our infrastructure and takes a look at our systems, it's very, very critical. The one that I point out most recently that I've seen was when the Canadian military went into the long-term care home system during the COVID period. And the long-term care home system, they made a very clear report showing that the privatized long-term healthcare systems were fucking rat holes. Were like literally people were abandoned, just people shoved into corners. People were literally dying of dehydration, not getting enough food. The place was bug infested, understaffed, like. And they very clearly juxtapose that to the public long-term care systems, and we're like, yeah, the public care systems could use more funding and could use more support, but they're absolutely nothing compared to what's going on in the privatized sector, which you can thank the Conservatives, Mike Harris and now Doug Ford, for that, right? Because their goal, of course, is to parasite the system and extract as much wealth as they possibly can for themselves. That's the goal of the privatization system, which they're seeking to expand now in Ontario. Like, it's a project of abandonment. It's a project of extraction and abandonment, and they're going to accelerate it when the Conservatives take power federally. Like, we're facing a very bleak, dark period of time here. So, and I don't think there's actually an electoral solution to it. I think the Liberals are on board with it, right? When the Liberals took power, it's not like they reversed these decisions made by Mike Harris. They just went along with it. The suspension of WFP deliveries indicated that airdrops may be one of the few viable options remaining to quickly get food into northern Gaza, said Ahmed Fuad Al-Habtib, a Middle East policy analyst who grew up in the enclave. Jordan's airdrops, he said, have set a critical precedent, showing the approach can work. Just wait until the IDF figures it out and starts airdropping bombs. Right? Oh, here's a crate. Yeah, it's full of aid. Haha, our markings are all Jordanian. Haha, here's a plane. It's oh look, here comes the parachute. Oh, you opened it up. That's what they'll do, right? These guys are psychopaths. Like they're for sure going to do that. Simply wishing for a ceasefire is not enough, Mr. Fuad Al-Khatib said. We need action right now. I gotta sneeze. Yeah, I muted that one. You like that? I muted it. So, I mean, good on the New York Times for actually reporting the deep cynicism and the deep sinister aspect of the IDF at all. Usually they like to ignore these things. It's lies by omission is usually how they operate. But today we actually get an article where they're like, maybe the Zionists are psychopaths. The one of the things I consider to be like very, very concerning as we're moving into this, from The Intercept, right? Meta considering increased censorship of the word Zionist. I think it may actually harm the fight against anti-Semitism, said the head of a Palestinian digital rights group briefed on the potential change. Facebook and Instagram's parent company, Meta, is contemplating stricter rules around discussing Israeli nationalism on its platforms, a major policy change that could stifle criticism and free expression about the war in Gaza and beyond. 5 civil society sources who were briefed on the potential change told The Intercept. Meta is currently revisiting its hate speech policy, specifically in relation to the term Zionist, reads a January 30th email sent to a civil society group by Meta policy personnel and reviewed by The Intercept. While the email says Meta has not made a final determination, it's soliciting feedback on a potential policy change from civil society and digital rights groups, according to the sources. The email notes that Meta is reviewing this policy in light of content that users and stakeholders have recently reported, but does not detail the content in question and name any stakeholders. This is 100% Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, protecting Zionism and protecting Zionists. That's absolutely what they're doing, right? That's absolutely what they're doing. Did you hear they found Hamas in a box of Cheerios in a Palestinian cupboard? Yes, of course. Yeah, ITC is owned by Mike Harris. Big surprise, yeah. Yep. When the federal cons get in, get ready for right to work. I mean, by the time the conservatives get in, the abandonment, like the structural abandonment will have set in so dramatically that it's difficult for me to perceive that even these conservatives are going to look out into the society and be like, yeah, the solution is to double down on the problem. You know, like, there does come one of the things that I think is really interesting when I talk about conservatives, right? I do think that conservatives, by and large, are every conservative is a very contradictory person. They end up being a very complex contradiction of things, where they're trying to find out how to be a good person, how to be a good capitalist, and how to be a good Christian, and you can't be all three. There's no world in which you can be all three. And of course, some of them don't care about being a good Christian, and some of them don't care about being a good person, and all of them care about being a good capitalist. But every so often, you do get conservatives that are like, man, you know, geez, look at this problem. Like, look at this thing that we're facing. Like, what would Jesus do? You know, like, this is serious. Like, this isn't. I don't know if this like free market thing is going to work for this, right? Like, it pays to remember that it was Stephen Harper and his government that put the child care benefit in place, because I think they looked out into their country and they were just like, oh fuck, like, child poverty is exploding, right? Why is it exploding? Well, because there's a lot of fucking poor people, and they have and like, they're working these shitty jobs, and they're working these shitty minimum wage jobs, and we're gonna end up with a bunch of poor kids. And we can't have it. So we're going to put in something like the child care benefit. We're going to actually help out. And we're actually going to do it. And it worked. It was successful, right? They don't want anybody to know about it, because then people will put 2 and 2 together and be like, wait a minute. If a basic income for children works and a basic income for the elderly works, well, why don't we just implement a basic income for everybody? Right? Because then you can't charge, you know, the cheapest possible rate for labor and expect people to go along with it, right? Yeah, maybe Zuckerberg is a Zionist. I wouldn't be surprised, right? I wouldn't be surprised. Like, all these guys are psychos. Like, Elon Musk is pro-Zionist, right? Like, Zuckerberg is probably pro-Zionist. Like, and I don't put it past these guys that these guys are like this because they're like, oh sweet, we get to murder brown people, right? Like can we hunt them? Israel is immune because it's a financial hub with US banks and hedge funds. I mean, the reason, right? The reason Israel is immune is because of its geographical location. Right? It is absolutely the reason why it is immune to criticism, why it is immune to everything, is because it is an extremely important military base. It is an extremely important military location, right? So if this doesn't exist, right, then you don't really have a lily pad. You don't really have a stronghold to get into the Middle East, right? Or Africa for that matter, right? Like you're always kind of going across the Mediterranean. You're always kind of going across. Like anytime they do anything in the Middle East, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, all around here, they are definitely going into Israel. They are going out of Israel to do all of that, right? Like, sure, they have stuff in the Arabian Sea. Like, sure, they've got stuff happening in here to act as a protectorate. But, like, in terms of major operations, it's all coming out of Israel. And they've been explicit about that. And then on top of that, the goal, the plan, is to actually expand the borders of Israel, right? To expand the borders of Israel and to build something called the Ben Gurion Canal, right? The idea being that they want to carve a canal all the way through here, right, through Israel, to be able to circumvent the Suez Canal, right, so that they can gain control of international trade. That's the goal, because if you actually zoom it out to this level, right, like right now, if China wants to get something to Italy, right, it poops out a little boat, and instead of going, which adds like weeks of travel time, right, it goes up here and it goes through the Suez Canal, right? Well, the goal for the Americans is to create their own canal in Israel and then blow up the Suez Canal, right? Just destroy the Suez Canal. And that way it'll force China and everybody, if they want to gain a connection to Europe without having to go all the way around Africa, they'll have to deal with Israel. And of course, that means that they can successfully blockade, they can successfully put embargoes, they can successfully do a lot of different stuff. This, of course, has led the Chinese to build the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a series of high-speed rail trains, which there's been news in that regard. Oh, did I shut that down? I think I did. Did I? Nah. China's 450-kilometer-an-hour high-speed CR-450 train to be tested this year and set to enter service by 2025. China has built a series of rail up into Europe and up and into the Middle East. Some of the rail can go as fast as 600 kilometers an hour. But if you take a look, so China's idea is rail systems, right, to circumvent this whole naval problem, right? Because the Americans' goal is to blow up naval trade for the Chinese, which you can see in a Pentagon document called Thinking Through the Unthinkable, War with China, where they outright stated that their goal would be to blow up Chinese naval trade. So the Chinese response is, okay, land trade, right? We'll do land routes and land trade. Well, if you take a look at Israel, right? You take a look at Israel, that means that China cannot get a rail into Africa, right? They'll never be able to build a rail into Jordan and then through the borders of Israel because the Israelis will never allow it. So Israel is like a crucially center. It's a central, like it's such a well chosen position for the Western forces to put a military base and to have an occupation, right? It's so well chosen because it puts them right in the middle of Africa and the Middle East. It puts them right in the middle, and it puts them right on exactly the place where they need to have a lily pad base to be able to get in and do stuff. It's the reason why Israel can essentially do what it wants, because it is the crown jewel. Like, if you imagine the military-industrial complex as like a crown, at the dead center of it, right at the very top, centerpiece of the crown is Israel. For sure. And so they'll never let go of Israel. Like, if America ever lets go of Israel, that will be the moment that you know that America is dead. Like, literally dead. That America as an entity has ceased to exist in any serious capacity whatsoever. It's that crucial and that important to American imperialism overseas. What's really cool, and I kind of got to talk about this, is that in order to circumvent the existence of Israel to get a rail in. It looks like in this part of the desert, the Saudis are building a city called Neom that you can actually look up. In fact, I'll show you. They've announced the plans already, and the plan is very Neom Saudi project. Yeah, this is great. They're going to be two like big, gigantic, like as big as skyscrapers. Yeah, what they call the line, right? And of course, what it is it's going to be a rail line, right? They call it a vertical city, and they call it all this kind of stuff. But really, what it is it's like here's pictures of it already. You can see they're in the midst of construction, right? Really, what it's going to be is it's going to be a big, gigantic rail that I think what their plan is to build under the Gulf of Aqaba, right? They'll build the rail line all the way up to the coast, and then they'll build underneath, and they'll have it come out in Egypt. And so they'll be able to get around Israel and build under the Gulf of Aqaba. And they're also going to build like a city, like a vertical city, and surround it with civilians so that if the United States bombs it, it'll be a humanitarian crisis. It'll be like bleak and dark. It'll be war crimes, right? It won't be war infrastructure. It'll be bombing civilians. And so this area and the politics surrounding everything that's happening right now is absolutely incredible, and I love to talk about it because it's just so interesting. And the Saudis, I think, are Machiavellian geniuses, right? I'm wondering if such a city is sustainable in the long term. No, obviously not. Like it's going to turn into a piece of infrastructure. That's what it's going to turn into, right? Like, and the people that live in the city will be widely abandoned by the Saudi family, and in like 100 years, people will be like. It'll just be like a shitty, greasy, like desert. It'll be a hellhole, right? Like it'll be a dystopian nightmare because they're not gonna have like civil services and shit. Like that's not gonna happen. So like, but this is what I'm saying about the Saudi family and the Saudi Arabians and Saudi Arabia, right? Somebody pointed out recently there is no place as Saudi Arabia. Right? If you take a look at history books, like it's never been called Saudi Arabia. It's called Saudi Arabia because the people who are in charge is the Saudi family, the Saudis, right? So it's Saudi Arabia. When everybody in history has understood this is Arabia, right? Arabia is the name of this place. It's just Saudi Arabia because those are the people that control it. It'd be like if after every election, it's like, yeah, this is Biden states. The Biden United States, the Trump United States, right? That would be like how it would be. But the Saudis are Machiavellian geniuses, and I don't think that I don't think there's anything that can be debated on that point. Like they're Machiavellian geniuses. They're always on the right side of power, and I've said it again and again. Like if you take a look at pictures through time of the Saudi family. Right? They're never the guy right in the middle of the picture, right? There's a group of nations and their leaders are right in a row, right? They're never the guy that's in the middle. They're always off on the side, right? But they're in the picture, and that's all they care about. They just want to be in the picture with the winners. And it looks like as the society pivots away from America and as the world population pivots away from America, the Saudis are pivoting towards China. Especially now after this genocide has happened, right? Like it's very unlikely that the Saudis are going to be able to normalize relations with Israel now. And in the midst of all of this, of course, Israel's economy is absolutely taking a shit. It's absolutely taking a shit. Like they're losing as much as 20% of their GDP in the midst of all of this, and that's for a lot of reasons. You got the Houthis causing problems with an embargo here, not letting Israeli goods and Israeli ships through this little passageway here, right? So the Houthis are putting up a fight and a struggle here, which is incredible, frankly. And then you've got people in the region are just not accepting Israeli goods. You've got embargoes that are actually happening across Europe, across Africa, and even in the United States. You got the BDS movement, right? The boycott, divest, and sanction movement that's happening. And it's all having an effect. It's all making the Israeli economy tank as they commit this genocide. And it's becoming less and less likely that the global south, at least, is going to be interested in using Israel as a trading partner because of what they've done. Yeah, dude, if Israel announces a 20% hit to their economy, you can be sure it's more, yeah. Yeah, Sweden to join NATO, I think it's just the stupidest idea possible. Like, I really do. Like, I don't understand why these Scandinavian countries are so gung-ho. Like, if I was Sweden and Finland and Norway, I would shut my mouth. I would just shut my mouth. I would just straight up be like, yeah, yeah, ha 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 ha. We don't share a border with Russia. Ha 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 ha. Like, these countries saying that they are going to join up with NATO, I think is a massive, massive error. It's a little tiny bit different because Norway, Sweden, Finland, like this area here, while they have had conflict with Russia, these are not the traditional corridors by which invasion occurs. Right? Historically speaking, the traditional corridor is through Ukraine, right? Why? Just look at the terrain, right? Just look at it. It's flat, right? It's easy to traverse, right? Flat land, rolling hills. You go up here, you take a look like Finland, like much marshier, mountainous, much more difficult to traverse. And then on top of that, like to even get large amounts of troops here, well, you got to get them there. Right, you got to actually get them there. So if you wanted to have a big invasion force come up through this way, well, you're committing a lot. And if you're committing any resources up into here, well, where are they not going to be? They're not going to be in the traditional line. They're not going to be in the place where the war is actually happening, right? So it's the reason why like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are not really seen. Like why has Moscow not started wars over Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania? Right, they're members of NATO. So I think this is a much more significant threat to Russia. So nice Union Dixie theme song for the Chinese poop song. I didn't even put that together. I guess I could have been like da na da da na da na da na na. Bethany writes, our cons were of the Thatcher brand conservatism for years. Now these clowns are going MAGA, or a combination of both. We're truly a country caught between the US and the UK. I think what we're seeing is the natural response. Like it's the end of the neoliberal era. And we're seeing like the end result of that. We're seeing the end result of the end of the neoliberal era, where the capitalists can no longer, like the inherent contradictions that exist within the capitalist class you're no longer able to justify them away. You can't create an argument, and the arguments that are created are so phony and fake that they're so phony and fake and so transparent and so obviously fake that they have to come up with other explanations for what is happening, right? Like it used to be a rising tide raises all boats. That, of course it's okay to have some rich people because the whole economy will increase, and as their wealth increases, so too will yours. That's obviously bullshit. Only crazy people believe that, like on the same level as flat earthers. And so they have to come up with other explanations for why what is happening is what's happening. And so they pivot, right? And the traditional pivot, if you take a look at history, immigrants, right? Immigrants are an easy pivot. It's especially beneficial that at this period of time, for the ruling class. They're increasing immigration, right? So you flood your borders with immigrants, and then you turn around and blame those immigrants for the problems that neoliberal has wrought. It's a scapegoating process. It's traditional. It's pretty normal, right? But because because they no longer have economic credibility, because there's no economist in the United States in any position anywhere that sounds rational or reasonable at all, they have to come up with these explanations, right? So why is the housing market going so crazy? It has nothing to do with the system of capital hoarding resources and withholding resources from the populace. It's because immigration is up, right? So yeah, Thatcher and Reagan compared to today probably couldn't even win their own parties. We've gone far beyond into insane drivel territory, and of course, supply side failed. Yeah, voodoo economics, right? Like it was supposed to fail. It was designed to fail. Mabler, Mabler. I'm gonna say Mabler. Good to see you. First comment. I hope it's a beautiful one. The problem of Finland joining NATO is that it is just beside Russia's door, and then NATO would have another entrance to strategically invade Russia in a possible conflict. Technically true. Historically, this is what's so stupid about these places joining NATO is that, like, the Finns do not want to have a conflict with Russia. Like, they don't want to engage in that kind of conflict. They're not prepared for it. They're not interested in it. I don't know why anybody would be interested in engaging in that kind of conflict. Like, if I'm looking at Finland, like, if I'm Finland, I'm telling my government, don't get involved in this. What are you talking about? This is clearly a conflict between Russia and NATO, so let it be. Let it be a conflict between Russia and NATO, and we're just going to be like, yeah, okay, champs. Whatever you fucking think, man, okay, right? We're not going to get involved in that. And I don't, like, certainly there could be, like historically speaking, any kind of military conflict that exists between Finland and Russia and Sweden and Russia and any of that kind of stuff is smaller in scale and isolated, and it's because Finland and Sweden are smaller in scale and are isolated, right? Like if you were to take 100,000 troops, like a credible number that could actually be a credible problem to Russia, right? 100,000 troops and send them up into Finland, well, it's easier for Russia to respond to that, and then be able to pivot back over to Ukraine, right? It's much, much, much more difficult to get 100,000 troops over to Finland. And then once you're there, once you're in Finland, you're committed, right? You can't really shift and redeploy these guys, because if you shifted and started redeploying these guys, well, Russia can shift and redeploy faster than you, just by the nature of the geography and just by the nature of how things are. And so if you get yourself in a redeployment pattern, well, Russia can just go and get over to where it needs to go faster than you can. So a deployment to Finland and a deployment, and this is historically true, right? It's the reason why Finland is never really, like, there has been military conflict there, but in terms of large, grand, big scale stuff, it's not the theater. It's not the place. It's not the massive, enormous battlefield that it looks like it should be, right? Because of these reasons. It's not good terrain. It's isolated. The defenders have an advantage. The Russians have an advantage. So it's so it's not a good time. Yeah, historically true as well. Stalin went to war with Finland because Finland was friendly for the Germans. The Soviets feared the Germans might invade the USSR through Finland. What do you think about the Enron theory with the housing bubbles? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to outside of, like, the Enron scandal, right? Like, yeah, I mean, look, the more you talk to me, the more you're going to realize that my perspective is very clear. We are in a position of extraction and abandonment. that the ruling classes of our society are extracting as much wealth as they possibly can from us, trying to find strategies to slow down our response to their extraction and abandonment, right? The goal is to extract as much wealth out of the society as possible, and then once the jig is up, once the collapse is set in, once the populace is no longer compliant, once the populace turns against the corporate structure and begins to fight back in meaningful ways, which is completely possible, the goal is to then let go and abandon, right? That's their strategy. And so the goal, like what's happening in the housing market is and nobody discusses it this way because it's not convenient for the ruling class, for the citizenry to recognize what's actually happening in the housing market, which is that the currency, the dollar, has become so fragile and so volatile that and same thing with treasury bonds and same thing with everything. So the question is, okay, if you have hundreds of billions of dollars, where do you keep your money, right? Where do you put your money? What's a safe place, right? What's the safe place to have your money held? And the answer is land. The answer is real estate, right? So you end up because if you put your money into dollars or into treasury bonds, well, that's in decline. So the value is declining. Well, what's not declining? Like what's going up? Well, it's housing, right? And that's because they've created a false they've hoarded the resource. They've created a false market. They're faking it, right? What's that word I'm looking for? They've created a false like they did to the diamond market, right? They created a false market. And so what they are doing is they're turning our housing market into a currency, right? Houses are a new form of currency that exists amongst the ruling class. That they don't care to rent these properties out. They don't care to flip them or sell them or do any of that kind of stuff. Because the goal for the rich is not to use a house for housing. The goal for the rich is to have houses as currency and to make sure that the value of their currency is at least stable, right? And if they can, false scarcity, that was the word I was looking for. Thank you, Bethany. So if they can create this false scarcity, it will increase the value of their currency, which is houses, right? And then, of course, another little side project that exists here in Canada, I don't know how pernicious this is in the United States, but it certainly exists in Canada, is that these criminal capitalists will use the housing market as a form of money laundering. They'll get involved in illicit activities, and then they will launder that money through the housing market. Like, once we get into hundreds of billions of dollars territory, the rules change completely. And this is something that I think the populace does not understand. Like, we as a populace are just coming to terms with how much $1 billion even is. We still have videos going around being like, if you made $1 a second, it would take you 30 days to make $1 million. But it would take you 300 years to make $1 billion. And Joe Rogan goes, whoa, my monkey brain just put that together. $1 billion is so much money, right? So for those of us that put that together 10 years ago, right, when we were like, 25, 15, 20 years ago, we're just like, yeah, $1 billion is like way more than $1 million, right? Like it's infinitely more than $1 million. For those of us that put that together, we're sitting here being like, oh yeah, so the rich are living in a completely different stratosphere. They're living in a completely different universe, using completely different rules. The whole penny capitalist idea that you get from conservatives blows up and does not exist. The relationship between the billionaire class and the banking class is completely different. That they don't need to really ask permission to do anything. Most laws are just the cost of doing things. Like if a law has a fine associated to it, it's not really a punishment for the rich. It's just the like if murdering a guy was a fine of $10 million, billionaires would just murder people. And they just be like, yeah, it cost me $10 million to murder that guy. Right? And there's no real understanding of like how cheap politicians actually are. Right? There's what, 300, let's say, I don't know the exact number, but there's like 400 congressmen, right? There's what, like 140 senators, something like this. I don't have the exact number right in my brain right now. So let's say rounded up 500 people. So there's 500 people. Oh, okay. Right? Do some real basic math, right? 500 people, you want to give each one of those people $100,000. Right? Like, that's cheap. That's super fucking cheap. You want to give each one of those people $1 million. Super fucking cheap. If you're a billionaire, if you have a $1 billion, right? Yep. There's been even more deregulation since 2008, right? Well, and when you think about what deregulation means, it just means let the rich do whatever they want. Right? Like we are looking at a system of extraction and abandonment. And the goal of the wealthy class is to get as much of our surplus value as they can, build as much assets and as much wealth for themselves as they can. And once the system collapses, they're just going to escape to their bunkers in Hawaii like Zuckerberg has, or they'll go off to Epstein's Island or wherever they're going to go, right? They'll go to Fiji, they'll go to this place, they'll go to that place, and they'll just stand back and watch America collapse, which is exactly what's going to happen. Like America as a country and as an entity, I think within my lifetime starts to fall apart. I don't think it stays together as an entity. Because there's no force keeping it together, right? Like once you understand, like, oh, it's always been just expansion and war, and just thumping the chest and being like, who's our enemy? Like we got to stay together to fight the enemy. And once you kind of get that, like maybe we're the bad guys, like maybe we've always been the bad guys, then there is nothing that keeps it together, right? And you're seeing massive cracks form in the union. Texas is the big one. What's going on at the Texas border with Greg Abbott and his fight against the federal administration, the Biden administration? It's like shots across the bow, you know? And that's what happens when empires fall into decline. They start to break apart. And America's going to start to break apart. And I actually think that's good for the world. It's good for the world that America is going to fall apart, because America has been nothing but a rapacious demon on the world stage, and to its own citizens since its inception. It's been this constant fight for just getting basic goods and getting basic shit done. Mabler says Americans will elect Trump next year. I think that's right. And so he will meet his promise of going to Venezuela, get all that oil. I think an attack on Venezuela would be an enormous mistake. I do not think it's going to go the way they think it's going to go, right? Like the Venezuelans have been preparing and ready. Like the Venezuelans are war ready. Like they are not sitting there being like, oh, let's just be lovely in the world stage. Like Venezuela is a highly militant, highly organized, highly incentivized country that has been preparing and building its military forces since Hugo Chavez took power. That the idea that the Americans are going to waltz into Venezuela and be like, we're going to take these oil reserves now. Thank you very much, Venezuela. Mission accomplished. I don't think that that's serious at all. Like, I think that you will, and the big thing I think that America would really struggle with is straight up just manpower. Like, the American strategy, and you can see this in Ukraine, right? The American strategy is to fund far-right extremist groups traditionally it's jihadist groups right across the Middle East, but right in Ukraine it's neo-Nazi groups, the Azov Battalion and the like, to fund those groups and have them fight the war for you. Well, there's no such force. Nothing like that exists in Venezuela. Not on a serious level. Not on the level that they can compete, right? Like they got like Juan Guaido, right? That's what they got, right? They don't have an internal military threat because the Chavistas aren't morons, and they're not just going to allow some for free speech's sake or whatever dumb fuck thing some right wing moron is going to come up with, for allowing some organized militant group to exist alongside of them. No, they stamp that out actively because they understand what a threat that represents. And so the only thing that America can do, like there's nobody in Colombia that's going to go on over to Venezuela. There's nobody in Brazil that's going to go into Venezuela, right? So if the Americans are going to do that, then they've got to do it themselves. And they don't have the manpower or the will or the competency, right? This situation in Ukraine, right, should reveal to everyone how incompetent these people are. Like NATO and the United States are deeply stupid. Like stupid on a level that I don't think they can recover from. Like, not only are the people who are in positions of power too stupid to know what they're doing, the people who they are training and grooming in order to take power after they have left power are equally as stupid and illiterate. So it's just going to be a cascading of stupid with literally nobody at any time being like, maybe we should know something about what we're doing. And the big thing about like what should really show you how incompetent these people are in the Ukraine struggle is that this was completely pointless. That literally what NATO was fighting for was, let's make Ukraine blue. This place is blue, and Ukraine should also be blue. That's quite literally their rationale. When we look at the map, we see Ukraine is not blue, and Ukraine should be blue, because then Ukraine will be blue. And that will be good for NATO, because NATO is blue. Meanwhile, Russia's like, yeah, we're not going to let you do that. Hard, firm red line. We will go to war over it. Meow, 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 meow. But Ukraine could be blue. So we'll fund a coup, and we'll overthrow, and we'll fund neo-Nazis, and we'll have those neo-Nazis go to the ethnic Russian border of Russia and start shelling ethnic Russians, right, for 8 years, right? We'll pretend like we're interested in these Minsk Accords, but then admit we were never serious about that. We were just buying time to continue arming and funding neo-Nazis in Ukraine, right? And the Russians are like, yeah, like, we're not going to let you do that. And the entire time NATO and the Americans are like, well, if you don't let us turn Ukraine blue, then we'll put sanctions on you, and that'll make you a poor problem. That'll be problems for Russia. And all it did is it made Russia go, hey, China, you want to be buddies? And China went, yeah. Yeah, we do. So you just chased this enormous, huge, massive country with all of these resources and all of this land and all of this ability and all of this population into the hands of your fucking enemy. You dim-witted dumbasses. Why? Because Ukraine should be blue. It should be blue. It's not blue. It should be blue. Like, there's no actual reason to have done this. Right? Like, if NATO had just gone, okay, Ukraine, obviously, like, the Russians are obviously insistent, and for good reason. Do you remember that time that Germany invaded Russia and killed 25 million people? Germany, you know, the people who are in NATO, you know how Adolf Hausinger, former Nazi, used to be the leader of NATO? Maybe it's rational and reasonable that Russia would be like, yeah, Ukraine should be neutral, right? And if NATO had just gone, yeah, Ukraine, for sure. For sure, Ukraine can be neutral. For sure. Even better, at one point, Russia was like, hey, can we be part of NATO? Right? And the Americans had a brief moment where they were like, maybe. Yeah, maybe. And then they went and talked to Europe, the Nazis in Europe, right? The Germans. Let's be straight. And the Germans were like, no, our goal is to kill 25 million more of these guys and steal their territory. That's what our goal's always been. And so they were like, nah, thanks for asking, Russia, but no. So they had a real opportunity where Russia could have just joined NATO. Right? And imagine that. Imagine this whole bloc being in the same international defense treaty. Right? Look at that from the global south perspective. Instead of that, what we're going to do, we're going to alienate Russia. We're going to chase them into our enemies' hands. Right? We're going to embolden their position, strengthen them, and now the bloc looks like this. Right? Now the bloc looks like this. Like, it's the dumbest shit you've ever seen in your life, and it's 100% because they're like, but Ukraine could be blue. So the idea that these fucking dimwits, these incompetent morons, these incapable losers, this brain-dead group of yes men who have been trained to be nothing more than capitalist yes men are going to meaningfully go into Venezuela and win a war is a total fucking farce. Best case scenario, right? Best case scenario is that the Americans will successfully destroy a lot of infrastructure, right? They will set Venezuela back a lot, because that's always the goal with this shit. But they will not be able to successfully get boots on the ground and successfully dominate and control Venezuela. They couldn't take Vietnam. They couldn't take Laos. They couldn't take Cambodia. They couldn't take North Korea, even though they successfully took the South, right? They couldn't successfully take Afghanistan. They couldn't successfully take Iraq. They couldn't successfully take Syria. They're not going to successfully take Venezuela because they're too stupid to do so. Straight up. They don't have the intellectual capacity to be able to do it. Because their entire war strategy is shock and awe. And the military leadership of communist and socialist nations are not impressed. Right? The military leadership of jihadist nations are not impressed. You come in with your shock and your awe and expecting everyone to be like, oh, and many of these nations go, okay, yep, that's what you did. That's it. And they're just not impressed. OD1, hello, bro. Hello to you. Emixter asks, why would they want to take any of those countries? Is that really the point? I mean, what you're alluding to, I think, is that there is just like a military-industrial complex, and that the military-industrial complex makes its money through war. So it's not really about seizing territory, and it's not really about, like, sure, they want resources and they want all that kind of stuff, but really what they want is an excuse to tax the American populace and to extract as much wealth as they can from the American populace, and to have a reason to be able to do so, right? So an argument for, like, why do they want to do the Ukraine war? Well, they've got all these bombs and they need to drop them somewhere. So Ukraine seems fine. Right, and we've got a motivated force, the Nazis in Ukraine. So let's arm them. We'll sell them a bunch of money. Like they're admitting it. Like they're really admitting it. Like one of the things that they've said recently on corporate media, and nobody's ever pushed back on them, is Remember, that money we're spending on Ukraine, it comes right back to America, right? They're buying their weapons from America, right? These are good American jabs, right? American weapons and American money that we're making. So when the Biden administration gives $98 billion to Ukraine, a lot of that comes back to America in the way of jabs, right? Just basically confirming that the people in the military-industrial complex are psychopathic. Just narcissistic, bleak demons. Just soulless, faceless stormtroopers. And it's okay to do whatever you want to them because they're like bleak, dark-hearted, evil people. Obviously and very straightforwardly, right? Like just fomenting like brutal war for the sake of it itself, right? Because that's how they make money. Like the military-industrial complex taxes you, right? The United States government taxes you on behalf of the military-industrial complex, hands that money to the military-industrial complex, and you know they drop some bombs. You know they do some business, right? And like Smiley Butler got it right, right? Smiley Butler got it right. That war is a racket. That the whole point, like, if they manage to secure a bit of territory and get a resource or something, like Ukraine, it's as naked as it can be, right? If they manage to get a little bit of contracts or territory or some gas field or something like this, I mean, that's just gravy. But the point is the sale of the weaponry, right? They don't actually care if Ukraine wins this thing. They don't care. Like, America is not at all... The stakes for this conflict, right, from the American perspective, are actually zero, right? If they can get you convinced and whip you up and get you to change your Facebook profile picture to a Ukrainian flag and hire a bunch of propagandists to be like, this is the most, it's the existential state, oh my goodness, it means everything, the huge crisis of Ukraine loses, then it's the end of oh my God. If they can get you whipped up into that hysteria and get you convinced that this actually matters to you, right? And actually get you convinced that, like, I should be paying taxes to this. This is an important thing to me, for sure, right? Then they will. But if Ukraine loses this war, it will have exactly this much effect on any Westerner's life anywhere, right? And I don't mean just in the United States and Canada. I mean literally like Germany, right? Germany's like a day's drive away from Ukraine, and if the Ukrainians lose this conflict, it's going to mean nothing to the Germans, right? Outside of the hysteria that they're whipping up for themselves, which, incidentally, we should not pretend as though that hysteria is not serious and does not exist, right? Germany reconsiders using nuclear weapons. That's what we should do. We should allow the former Nazi state to have nuclear weapons. That's for sure what we should do. Great idea. Hey, didn't their current government just sit down with neo-Nazi movements and there was a big protest about it? Yeah, we should let these guys have nuclear bombs for sure. Right? The rehabilitation of the Nazis and the fact that the Nazis have gone into a memory hole is pretty startling. Right? And it's manifesting here in the West in a big, like, communism and Nazism are the same. You just need to ignore literally everything the Nazis ever did. Right? And as long as you ignore literally everything the Nazis ever did, then sure, the communists are just as bad as they are as soon as you ignore everything the Nazis ever did. Right? The communists, they had a famine one time, and that's the same as the Holocaust and World War II. That's the same. Right? So this kind of Nazi apologetics and this Nazi collaboration, this Nazi revisionism that's going on in our society. And yeah, so we should definitely allow former Nazi state Germany to have nuclear bombs to act as a deterrent. And meanwhile, of course, China urges largest nuclear states to negotiate a no first use treaty. Right? Like, things have gotten so childish on the world stage. Childish is exactly the right word to use, that we're literally just trying to say, hey, like, we should have a treaty that says no first use, right? Like, not even, like, disarmament. I think one of my favorite things when it comes to talking about the nuclear question is fucking Reagan, the guy that everybody jerks off about. All these conservatives walking around being like, Ronald Reagan, the greatest conservative that ever lived in the history of conservatism. Oh, the king. I know that when I think about Ronald Reagan, to me, it's Jesus Christ, Ronald Reagan, and George Washington. Those are the big three in my books right there. Yuckles, right? Ronald Reagan actually negotiated nuclear disarmament. That under Ronald Reagan, the United States was disarming their nukes alongside Russia. That they were working in tandem with one another and looking at each other and being like, you know, I think it might be a bad idea to have all of these nuclear bombs around. I think it might be a good idea for the American people to put aside some of these nukes and perhaps we can live in the world, and certainly not peacefully. We're still Americans, but nukes are a bit of a thing, you know? So the idea that we can't do it, or the idea that we won't do it, really shows you how babyish we've become, right? The idea that we're literally like, nukes are good for some reason. And we've got like internal philosophers like Sam Harris being like, it is actually a good idea to nuke people first. You know, I think that we could justify that. That's a thing that we can definitely do. Can't spell Israel without liars. Yeah. Venezuela is still in danger from neoliberal Brazil. I don't think that there's a military, like a real credible military concern. Like, I'll start talking about a credible military concern when the Lula movement is actually couped. And I don't mean like legislatively couped. I mean like there's a military force that comes in and coups them. Then I think you can seriously talk about that. But like an internal military force is not going to move from Brazil into Venezuela without dealing with its own internal thing first. So if like Bolsonaro were to rise back up in Brazil like if when he lost the election, if when he did that coup attempt, he actually managed to coup the government and take power again, yeah, then we can talk about it. But right now the government is run by Lula. Lula is a more interesting, more sympathetic figure, I think, on the world stage. He's denounced Israel. He's compared Israel to the Nazis. He's removed the embassy of Israel from Brazil and from Israel. He actually gives a shit about, like, hey, maybe poor people, we should actually try to help them, like that kind of stuff. Just me, you're not muted. I bet you were trying to say some stuff that got you muted, but yeah, the USSR tried to join NATO in the 50s. The USSR tried to join NATO in the Russia tried to join NATO in like 2010, right? So Ronald Reagan could barely tie his own shoes. Well, I mean, look, the United States, and you're seeing it right now with Biden, the United States has a long history of just propping up faces. Like, Biden is just a face. Sorry, guys, 1 second. I got to deal with my dog. 1 second. Hey, buddy. I know. Here, bud. Let me give you a little food. Here, bud. Here you go, buddy. All right. Sorry about that, guys. I had to deal with my dog. And then I stood up and my body was like, we're peeing, right? That's what we're doing? We're peeing, right? Palestine needs some democracy. I mean, I feel like what's happening in Palestine is it's beyond that. Like if this whole conflict is to pretend as though this has anything to do with democracy anymore. Like we're through the Rubicon, people. Like we live in a fascist Nazi level society at this point. That we're just waiting for the tip over for when the rationale and the logic of what we do overseas and how we operate overseas begins to happen internally. That's the only thing that is happening today. That it is only a matter of time, and it's for sure going to happen in my lifetime. For sure that's going to happen. Secrets, good to see you. And you're seeing it in some of the deep South states. You're seeing it in Florida and Georgia, where they're literally building Cop City in Georgia, right? Like the country is taking a hard, far right, Nazi level turn, and sections of the United States are going to go full blown. Like they're going to go full blown with the costumes and the uniforms and the outfits and the whole thing, all the pageantry, everything you come to expect to see from that kind of scale of heavily militant racist society. It's going to happen in the United States, and I don't think it's possible to stop it at this point. I think all you can really do is flee from it and prepare for it. Because I think the force that has taken over in domestic America has the full force of the United States military, which has been training itself overseas for decades. It's been training itself to turn around and take that internal logic and to decimate its own country with it. You can see it in figures like Dan Crenshaw. You can see it in the McCarthy-style rhetoric that's starting to come out. And straight up, you can see it in governors. I think Florida is a great place to look at. DeSantis, right? You can see it with like the fucking wall rhetoric, like all of this shit. It's definitely coming for America, and we here in Canada are not going to be immune to it. And so we're going to experience a very bleak internal fascist moment. And I don't think it's avoidable at this point. Secrets, good to see you. Bethany asks, do you think Ontario has passed the point of no return like I have? Oh, yeah. Ontario has an economy that's about as strong as Alabama's, with like 4 times the population. Like what's happened in Ontario is an embarrassment. Like and the people who are supporting Doug Ford are easily the stupidest people, maybe in human history, right? Like literally. The ethos that has taken over the Western mind is the best way to build a society is by destroying it. That's the ethos that has taken over the mind of the West. So if like this is basic libertarianism, which now libertarianism has become somewhat synonymous to conservatism. And that the conservatives are less and less sounding like rational people who actually have a basis in any kind of even theory about how to run a government. Yeah, they claim Doug Ford is not conservative enough. Yeah, oh yeah. If you want to see where the conservatives are heading in Ontario, you just need to take a look at who they ran before Doug Ford, right? Tim Hudak said in public, on camera, in a news conference, in front of people, he ran on the campaign. Literally, he campaigned on, we're going to fire 100,000 public sector workers, and somehow that will create 1 million jobs in Ontario. Like, it's this shit. It's this guy, right? Where are we here? Hold on. It's, yeah, here we go. It's this fucking guy, right? If you don't know who this is Argentina's Milei. Just recently won an election. He's a libertarian anarcho-capitalist, right? And he implemented his policies, and they failed instantaneously. The society instantly collapsed. Inflation has gone up something like 200%. Poverty has increased by 55% in the society. It is an abject and total failure, and this is what the average American believes now. That the best way to build a civil society is to destroy it. Well, you can't build a society that way. You cannot build a society by destroying it. And but that's the conservative ethos, and that's the conservative mindset. And you can hear like very popular commentators talking this way. This is how Ben Shapiro talks. This is how Jordan Peterson talks. That the best way to build a society is to destroy it. And if you are experiencing hardships in the society that we advocate to destroy, then it's a you problem and it's your fault, and you just need to buck up and build smart. Mabler, Millie is really smart. No, he is not. He is a very deeply stupid person. Like a deeply, deeply stupid person. You should go see his Twitter feed. He's just incredibly stupid. He actually genuinely thought that this would work. That's the thing that convinces me that he is a very, very stupid person. I actually think that he's quite mentally ill. Right? Like I think he does have some kind of mental illness to believe the things that he believes in spite of any evidence or facts or anything. And it's very clear that he was a true believer in this libertarian anarcho-capitalist idea, and that now that he's enacted all of it and it's failing so spectacularly and the country is revolting against him, there are massive strikes happening, everybody's basically turning on him, he's just like crying about it. Right? Because he's such a fucking loser. Like, he's so stupid. Like, this is something that I think we as a people need to really get a hold of and really grasp, is that, like, just because people speak this way and speak with a very clean language, and they use expressive words in order to articulate complex sounding theses and thoughts, and I feel as though I have articulated my point completely. And at some point a person needs to take responsibility for themselves in this society, and it doesn't mean they're smart, right? That energy hits your mouth before it hits your brain, and for a lot of these guys, energy stops at the mouth and never actually hits the brain. Right? Like, why do you think Ben Shapiro talks like this all the time? Hi, I'm Ben Shapiro. Everybody, if you're complaining about your society, maybe you need to take a look at yourself and not be so lazy, The best thing to do is flood the streets with cops, and that'll solve the society. War is peace. War is peace. War is peace. Ha 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 ha. The guy's a clown. Like, the guy's a stupid person. Right? Because thoughts and energy don't hit his brain. They hit his mouth, and you just hear them. And he's just talking at such a rapid pace that you're just like, wow, he must be smart. When he's the stupidest person you've ever even listened to in your life. Right? Like, that stupidity is widespread. Well, but the whole point, methane, right? The point is to extract as much from the society and then abandon it. That's the goal. That's the point. And then to retreat into your gated communities and surround yourselves with cops. That's the goal. That's their intention, right? And so while you're going through that process of extracting as much wealth as you possibly can, and then abandoning everybody, well, you want to make sure that you can slow the revolt and quell revolt. And a good way to do that is through psychological warfare. Gaslighting is very effective. It's why people do it, right? Like, the problems that you are experiencing are what are you doing about these problems, right? You can see this as cleanly, like, they're using it as a tactic right in front of your face. ExxonMobil CEO says big oil has done its part. What a fucking joke. Oh, we've put all these guys in prison? Because that would be doing its part. If the ExxonMobil CEOs were in jail, then they would be doing their part, because their part would be acting as a symbol for what should never have been done, right? Which is propagandizing against the society, lying to the people, being traitors, basically. It's time for civilians generating emissions to pay. It's your fault. You're the problem. Certainly not the companies that have been standing in the way of climate change reform and a transition away from fossil fuels for decades and decades and decades and decades. Certainly not these companies that buy up technology and then bury them. Certainly not these fossil fuel brained liars who have funded propaganda campaigns and disinformation campaigns in order to lie to the citizenry and pretend like there is both side issues. When Milley's policies lift Argentina out of poverty, it won't, right? It's just not possible. Like, it didn't work in Chile. It's not going to work in Argentina. It's not working in America. It's not going to work in Argentina. Right? Show me one place where these theories and these ideas have actually functioned and actually worked. Right? They don't. They don't actually work. Right? With record high growth, people are fleeing. It's a catastrophe. Right? People are running away from Argentina. Emigration numbers are through the roof because poverty is spreading like wildfire. It's a total disaster. He'll be clapped by the World Bank and institutions. He'll become a role model of how to recover a country. I mean, that's possible. It's possible that he'll destroy the country the way that he has, right? Just absolutely implode the country. And then he'll put in a bunch of policies in order to recover from the disaster that he created. And the World Bank will go, good job, you solved the crisis that you created, right? And we'll all be told, like, what a great guy, like, what a good, whoa, he solved the crisis of Argentina. And they'll all talk about it as if he was not the person responsible for creating the crisis in the first place. And chances are good that the policies he put in will basically be a regression of his policies and a return to what was going on before, because he's such a phenomenal failure as a human being and as a leader. CBC just lied about the Belleville situation. They're pushing the it's all drugs excuse hard, little mention of the insane level evictions and all the companies buying the homes. Yeah. No. It's find any scapegoat, right? Find any scapegoat whatsoever that doesn't point the finger at the rich, right? Any excuse. DM, good evening, John. What do you think about Joe Biden passing a law banning all gig jobs and making them real jobs in order to skim more income tax off of the working poor? I mean, I think you've loaded the... Well, CBC was never centrist. CBC has always been state news. So they're always responsive to the party that's in power. But I make the argument that organizations like the CBC are actually important. Joe Biden bans all gig jobs. I mean, these jobs shouldn't have existed in the first place. Yeah, the CBC has gone further right because the society has gone further right. Like, that's something to really understand. Like, we live in a primarily fascist society now. Right, like fascism is probably the most popular ideology. Right, the hyper individualistic worldview. It's almost impossible for people to think outside of a hyper individualistic worldview. When you start talking about issues and start talking about problems, the very first thing that leaps right to the top of mind is, well, what are you doing about it? As if a single individual in a multi-trillion-dollar system is the difference maker. Right. And not that we should all come together and come to a consensus as a people, but rather that it's you and you should just follow your entrepreneurial spirit and be the leader. Right. Like this sort of ridiculous idea. Let's take a look at Quartz on this one. Yeah, gig jobs are ridiculously predatory. Yeah, it's just a method by which they erect new slave models, right? That's all. That's what America is all about. That's what capitalism is all about. But one thing I do want to say about the CBC, okay? I want to say this about the CBC. it's important that we have an organization like the CBC. I think the CBC is important. And the reason why I think the CBC is important is that, yes, it's state propaganda. Okay, fine. We can accept that. But if you don't have state propaganda, if you don't have propaganda that comes from the state, then you explicitly and exclusively are at the behest of corporate propaganda. And that's the only propaganda that you have access to. And when you compare the difference between state propaganda and corporate propagandists are really willing to fucking explicitly lie. Like, expressly and explicitly lie. Like, the National Post is willing to stand in front of you and tell you bald-faced, completely false information as if it's true. Whereas the CBC and the State Department actually believe in the idea of, well, we should say actually facts. What you'll find the CBC does, right? What you'll find the CBC does is that they're not explicitly and expressly lying, right? They're just presenting a bias, and that bias is alongside, like, let me be clear what I mean, because people, I think, there's like a purposeful misunderstanding that happens when I say these things. Okay, there is a difference between saying red is blue, right, and saying and just not talking about red. Like, there's a difference. And that's a strong difference. Like, there's a difference between saying Stalin committed a genocide in Ukraine and saying many people claim that Stalin committed a genocide in Ukraine. Right? This is the difference, right? And maybe that's a subtle difference, but it is a difference. And that you want different organizations with different perspectives and different ideas to exist within the media landscape. And so I think the CBC is largely a good thing to have, because sure, it's state propaganda, but I don't understand why shouldn't the elected party have a mouthpiece, right? Like that's sort of the oddest thing that these conservatives claim about the CBC, is that the elected party should not have a propaganda mouthpiece. It's like, of course they should. Like, what are you talking about? Obviously they should. They're our elected government. The prime minister should not have a media department. What are you talking about? Of course they should, right? Any leader should. Like, what are you talking about? And so to me, it's not like, let's eliminate the CBC, because then we're listening to fucking Conrad Black. Like, fucking no. What do you think of Wendy's going to surge pricing? I mean, yeah, like, it's just price gouging. That's all. I'm surprised they even announced it. Like, that's all. Like, why didn't they just do it? Forget about it. Like, just do it. Don't announce it. Just start doing it. I bet you most people wouldn't even notice, right? The people who go to Wendy's are just like, oh, that's a bit more expensive. I guess prices are going up. I went and got a burger from, there's a Harvey's down the way, and I was out really, really late, and I was like a little drunk. And so I was like, let's get some drunk food. I went and got a Harvey's burger. It cost me fucking $12, and it was a piece of garbage. Why does anybody go to these places? Like, they're just as expensive as anywhere else. They're faster. I'll give them that. They're faster. But the quality is trash, right? Like if it was like 30% cheaper, I would be like, okay. But it's not. They're just as expensive. Like, it's just ridiculous. Yeah, America is really insane as they grow without reaching an end every year. Look up their GDP. They have been growing for decades nonstop. Where is the limit of such growth? Endless growth. Yet it's the ideology of a cancer cell, right? Endless growth is cancerous, and that's their perspective, is to grow like a cancer cell. And eventually they'll just kill the host, which is exactly what will happen, right? The United States is not going to survive if they continue acting in the way that they're acting. And you're going to see like enormous internal disruption. Like the union struggle that's happening across the United States is just the start. It's just the beginning. And as states start to fail more spectacularly, and as they get more serious, and as homelessness accelerates, as all of this accelerates, and as it becomes more apparent that we have been abandoned, I think that's what's crucial and that's what's key. So, like, Noam Chomsky talked about this, and I tend to agree with this perspective, which is that when the Depression was happening, when the Great Depression was happening in the United States, people in the United States still had this sense of hope. They still believed that the political leadership was dealing with the crisis, that they were looking at the crisis and saying, "Oh God, this is a crisis. We need to do something about it. Let's work to resolve this crisis." Right? There was a belief within the populace that that was actually happening. This does not exist anymore. Nobody anywhere at all takes seriously even a tiny little bit that any politician, even in the party you support. Like if you're sitting there being like, I'm a Democrat, and if you're like, I'm a Republican, right? You don't actually believe any of these guys are going to do anything to help you, right? You're stuck in this like, well, it's better. This guy's better than that guy. I'd rather have a guy cut off my dick than my balls, right? Like that's how these guys are actually talking about this thing, and it's like you get that these guys are allies, right? You get that they work together, right? And the and so the populace understands, and the populace knows that we've been abandoned. There's just nobody actually articulating it so clearly, right? It's very few voices in the ether and in the zeitgeist that are actually saying, yeah, this is abandonment. The political class has abandoned us, and it'll get really obvious. Like when Trump comes in, and when Polyev comes in, and when all these guys come in, and when Europe swings to the right, the abandonment will become systemic and entrenched, and it'll become official in many ways. And so there's going to be states and there's going to be places that are finally going to recognize, like, oh shit, like we're completely fucking abandoned. We've got 1 million homeless people. We've got huge swaths of our society are just loaded with poverty, and the police budget keeps going up. Right? The police budget keeps going up. And the disparity is going to become so obvious, like aggressively obvious. And people are really going to begin asking very seriously, like, is anybody actually interested in doing anything about this? And the answer is going to be no. Like, the answer is going to be go fuck yourself. Right? And you're going to end up with slimy car salesmen as like Donald Trump, the one can of worms that he really opened up is he really made people realize, like, oh, a game show host can be president. Oh, like literally anybody can do this. And so you've just ended up with a Republican Party of like used car salesmen and just like shitty scumbags who are just total, like they're completely in it for themselves and no one else, which is all American politics is now. And I don't think that they can recover. Like I think that it will take them generations upon generations for them to finally get to a place where they're actually like, maybe the way to build a society is by building it. Right? Yeah, politics have become a sport. The presidential nominees are just mascots. Canada currently has worse wealth inequality than the US, and the US is terrible for wealth inequality. Yeah. Like, and that's only going to get more entrenched. Like, we're not doing anything about it. Like, exactly 0%. To me, I think the most depressing thing about what's going on in the West is that there is for some reason, there's a belief that we're going to solve this electorally. We'll get these Republicans in and they'll do something, and then it'll swing back to the Democrats and they'll do something, and like back and forth it'll go, and somehow there'll be an electoral solution, and there's no electoral solution. We love social democracy. Yeah, I mean, look, the only reason why American leftists jerk off about social democracy is because they don't know anything about its history, right? They take a look at the history of social democracy. They take a look at the current countries that call themselves social democrats, and they go like, well, that's what we want. We want to resolve our conflicts through electoral politics and have concessions from the capitalist class through electoral politics. And they just completely fail to realize that the reason why their quote-unquote social democracies worked is because there was the threat of communist revolution, right? Like, if you go over to these Scandinavian nations and you look at where they are, yeah, I want the government that Norway, Sweden, and Finland have. That's what I want. I want to make sure that we get a social democracy like Finland, Sweden, and Norway had, you know, as they were directly beside a country that had a straight up literal communist revolution and were actively funding for a long period of time communist revolutionaries with right along the border of Finland, and there were movements within Finland where they were going to their parliaments calling for revolution, calling for an overthrow of the capitalist class. And the capitalists went, ha ha ha, how about instead we just give you higher wages? Huh? Ha 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 ha. And it worked. Right? So unless you actually have this legitimate threat of communist revolution, your social democracy doesn't work. And what you're starting to see, and it's beginning to happen, right, in Finland, Sweden, and Norway, is forces within those countries to regress the society, right? Because that's what capitalism is. It's a highly regressive force. And how have these countries had to defend themselves from those regressions? Well, anytime a regression happens, the people have to go to the streets, right? You have protests and strikes. There's no way to organize a society. Right? You're telling me every single time any regressive legislation gets passed, the entire population needs to mobilize? Yeah, like it's not going to work forever. People get tired, right? Like and so your concept of social democracy, the idea that we're just going to vote it in, right? I think that's, especially when you take a look at what's going on in the United States, I think if your whole perspective is, I want to be a social democracy and have a social kind of thing, you're basically just saying, I want to invest in a system that's already died and abandoned me. I want to try to breathe life into this corpse. It's a form of denialism is what it is. It's denying what is factually the case, which is that the electoral system in the United States and Canada is already dead. It's not dying. It's not collapsing. It's not falling over. It is already dead. That we are within a dead corpse. And there are people within the dead corpse trying to pretend as though the corpse can be brought to life. Right? It cannot. The only thing that we can do within this dead corpse, not dying, dead corpse, is tear pieces off of it in order to use it as fertilizer in the ground in order to grow a new body populace. And that's all that we have left. There's no concept whatsoever in my mind of a revitalization. America's back, baby, and a revitalization of America and the West and all that kind of stuff. It cannot happen, right? Just like how a corpse can't suddenly go, oh man, I died for 50 years, but I'm back. No. Nope, that's not going to happen. Elon Musk has given us good jobs. Okay. So Elon Musk has created a strata of society that is detached from the other society. Right? Like I really need you to understand, okay, that there are two societies that we are now split into two factions, okay? And those factions are the capitalists, the owners, right? And the workers, everybody else. And those factions are split. And so when you say Elon Musk creates good jobs, basically all you're saying is there are people within the social strata that Elon Musk is in And he made a couple of more of those people. That there's a social strata that Elon Musk exists in. It's like Jeffrey Epstein was a job creator too, right? Elon Musk is demanding higher births and start paying mothers. Like this is the most embarrassing part about this birth conversation. Like we're in a massive birth decline, right? We're in a massive birth decline. We're in a massive population decline. Gen Alpha is half the size as a cohort as Gen Z. Half. It's an enormous decline. Precipitous. Straight up, boom, right down. And it is, and what it's so brilliant watching these corporatists and these neoliberals and these fascists be like, why is the population declining? It's such a mystery. I bet it has to do with YouTube. I bet it's the internet. Right? Meanwhile, anybody with a brain in their head is like, no, you literally force everybody to work full-time jobs in order to get small, tiny apartments. Nobody has any time. Everybody's exhausted. And then you terrorize us with war and climate change. That you're doing everything to make this place a hellscape. That we're looking over and being like, oh shit, this is a total fucking disaster. So you're disincentivizing in every single way, even the possibility of us coming together to have sex, to have children in the first place. And it's not like you pay mothers, right? It's not like being a mother is a paying gig, right? So a lot of people are just not able to do it. And so at the end of the day, neoliberalism is a complete and total catastrophe, a complete and total objective disaster that has resulted in a precipitous birth rate decline. And the response from the neoliberal fascists is to say, well, let's get more immigrants in here, which guess how neoliberal fascists are going to respond to that, right? So you can expect an internal war in the United States and Canada for sure. You can expect that from happening, right? All of a sudden, these we're about diversity and inclusion. Yep, that's going to turn right on its head, and you're going to see massive roundups and massive campaigns, right? You're already seeing that happen in Florida. Yeah, no, of course they didn't expect it because they're not smart, right? They're not an intelligent group. They're mainly fueled by a religious ideology that they call capitalism. But it's a religious ideology. And that religious ideology has three pillars, right? One of the major pillars of the religious ideology is the worship of the self. So you don't care about community. You don't care about your culture. You don't care about your society. You care about how your culture makes you feel. Right? Like, that's all. So when you evoke the name of America and say, America's the greatest country in the world, you don't actually care about America. You don't actually care about the culture or the community. You don't actually know anything about America. You don't know anything about that. You only care about it insofar as it makes you feel and as it is an identifier of you. Right, so they don't look at stats or statistics or any of that kind of stuff because none of that has anything to do with them, right? So the worship of the self is very telling. Just let the immigrants out, and so they can go where, right? Why do you think they're coming here? Because it's the last place that we haven't bombed, right? Like, the reason why people are coming to the United States and Canada is because we don't bomb the United States and Canada. Right? We bomb everywhere else, and we destroy everywhere else, and we fund movements to destroy their countries everywhere else. Right? So they've got somewhere to go. So they got... Well, don't think they won't force birth. What do you think the repeal of Roe v. Wade was? Why do you think they're making it illegal for people to have abortions? Right? What is correct attitudes and questions we must address ourselves about capitalism in Russia? I mean, Russian capitalism, the rest, I think it's appropriate to say that what happened in Russia is actually truly capitalist restoration. That they are a neoliberal capitalist state with their own oligarchy and the whole nine yards, right? I think that that is all very accurate. And that they went through a period because they were appeasing capitalists post World War II and they didn't want to experience a World War III. They didn't want to lose 25 million more people to a Nazi fueled NATO. They went through a period of capitalist appeasement. Unlike the Chinese, their capitalist appeasement led to full-scale capitalist restoration. And during that capitalist restoration period, it was a humanitarian crisis for Russia. That they went through like a real dark and bleak period of time after the fall of the Soviet Union, the abandonment of the Soviet Union, right? And and right now, so Russia has all of the same problems that every capitalist country is going to have. The big difference, and there is a difference, is that they still have, like, the opposition party in Russia is communist. It's the Communist Party of Russia, right? So the Communist Party of Russia, the opposition party, right? Like they have the ability to stand up and like put pressure on. So for example, what you have in Russia is a general sense of general welfare, right? They're a heavily Eastern Orthodox country as well, and so capitalism exists in Russia and the oligarchy exists in Russia, but it's only one of many forces that exists in Russia. It is certainly a powerful and important force, but it isn't the all-encompassing force that it is in America. Like in America, capitalism is its own religion and is infused to every single aspect. Like if you're a Christian fundamentalist, if you're an evangelical, you're a capitalist fundamentalist. Right? Like every aspect of life in America has become about the religion of capitalism, and about the three pillars of the religion of capitalism. And there's no escape from it. Every single aspect of life in America is about capitalism. And that's not really true, right? That's not really true in Russia, is that they have like, you know, they actually believe in things like community. They actually believe in the idea of like alternative power structures and things like this. Like very recently, they went through a referendum, a constitutional referendum. Right, that happened in 2020. Russia went through a constitutional referendum, and of course, Western forces were like, they're only doing this referendum so Putin can continue running for office. Right, so that they get rid of term limits and he can just keep running for office, and that's the only reason. But within that referendum, you know what they also included in their constitution? They included the statement that the minimum wage cannot fall beneath a subsistence level. Like, that's in the Constitution of Russia 2020. You're never going to see that in any Western nation ever. Right? They're never going to have a constitutional referendum and put in their constitution that the minimum wage must be a subsistence wage. It's just never, ever going to happen. So, so the hope, right? The hope for the future in Russia and in China too, incidentally, is that they begin. I shouldn't say begin in regards to China, because I think this is already how they operate, and I hope that Russia starts operating this way too. Is that when capitalism goes through its natural boom bust cycle, right? When the bust happens in the West, we bail out the bust, right? So the billionaire class and the psychopath class that do everything they can to make the bust as bad as possible and then profit from the bust, we tend to bail them out. And what the rest of the world, Russia included, needs to start doing is when that bust happens, basically just say, yeah, you knew what you're getting into, and start seizing assets and really getting rid of these capitalists as much as possible. Because it's that boom bust cycle that is emblematic of the capitalist structure. It's a major feature of the capitalist structure. And so my position when it comes to Russia uh, uh, is to hope that they are going to move in that direction and lean more towards China as China begins its process of leaning further and further away from capital and further away from the West. And that through that process, they'll begin a restoration of Marxist ideas and communist ideas. Uh, and more, but one thing I want to be really, really clear about, and I want that, and I hope that more communists and more Marxists start talking this way about China, about Russia, and about a lot of different nations, is that I do feel that what Russia and China both did in the Cold War period and their relationship with capital is rational. I think that it's communists and Marxists like to talk about it like it was a betrayal or an abandonment even, or any of that kind of stuff. But those Marxists and those communists often omit from the way they think about things war, that they don't include war in their analysis, which I think is a major and massive mistake. That it's rational for a country to enter a period of appeasement after having a catastrophe occur. The Great Patriotic War in Russia, what we call World War II, was a disaster for Russia, objectively. Like I think to say anything else is absolutely foolish. That they technically win that war and they defeat the Nazis, right? They lose 25 million men for it. They lose cities over it. It's a disaster. It's a total disaster. And so it's completely rational for Russia to go through a period and say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't antagonize these guys. Like maybe we should try to play ball. Like maybe, yeah, like we got rid of the Tsars and we've done a lot of good things in Russia under communism, but maybe now we can, try to, can't beat them, join them. Like, and I think that's perfectly rational. I can hope that Russia will go down a different line as the American empire begins to recede, but to pretend as though what Russia did was a total overthrow and abandonment and oh my god, it's a tragedy and all, I don't know, dude. Like I think it's completely rational how they acted. Eastern Orthodox is closer to ancient Christianity. It's a different line of Christianity. The Eastern Orthodox broke from the Catholics in I want to say like 12th century, 16th century, maybe even. That's pretty wide margin. So maybe I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But yeah, and they broke for just the silliest of reasons. Like literally, the Catholics wanted to change a couple of lines, not even a couple of words in the Bible, and the Eastern Orthodox were like, "That's it, we're done here." And but I mean, it's geographical. That's all. Like the Russian Christians were super far away from Italy. Like they're gonna have their own ideas and their own thoughts and their own doctrines, and they're not gonna align. So they just created a new line of thinking, the Eastern Orthodox tradition. Their architecture and their art is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, right? Like it rivals everything that we've created for sure in the West, in the religious art of the West. The Eastern Orthodox tradition is really, really gorgeous. And the Eastern Orthodox also made the choice to not canonize the Book of Revelations. They basically took a look at the Book of Revelations and was like, yeah, this is just going to be used as a justification for war and nothing else. It's a cool book, but we're not going to canonize it. We're going to leave it out. And so there's a major deviation. Like the Eastern Orthodox New Testament doesn't include the Book of Revelations. And I mean, the Book of Revelations has been used for exactly that reason. So it's, probably a pretty wise choice. Although the Book of Revelations is metal. It's just super metal book, dude. Like the book of, open up a Bible in the Book of Revelations and start reading at any moment, and you're just gonna get like a heavy metal, like And the seven-headed dragon raises up from the bowels of hell and spews its fire of damnation upon the plagued of the earth. Jesus Christ comes down from the heavens, spewing from his mouth a bronze sword upon the seven-headed dragon, condemning him back into the fires of hell for another 1,000 years, while the whore of Babylon flees into the desert. And that's like literally one passage. That's like literally like 2 verses of the book of Revelations. It's like, and the whole fucking book is like that, where it's just like, and the hosts of heaven, like, it's just crazy. The whole book is insane. The whole book is fucking insane. And I love it. Every time I read the book of Revelations, I'm just like, yeah. It's clearly John on like the island. I forget which island he was on. It was like the island of Ephesus or something like this. Just having crazy mushroom trips. The dude just ate like a pound of mushrooms and just had this crazy trip. Right? And while the trip was happening, he was just like, holy fucking shit. And he just like starts writing it down while it's happening. And they're just like, and he's like, this was a prophecy from the Lord. And meanwhile, it's just like, no, bro, you just went on like a psychedelic, crazy ass mushroom trip. And like, all of the shit that exists in Revelation speaks a lot more to the mindset of John than it does to like the prediction of the future. That if you want to actually seriously analyze the book of Revelations, that's how you should analyze it. You should basically be like, okay, this is what was in this guy's head during the time of Christ, and this is the stuff that he was thinking about the world that he existed in this time. And like that, it's all a reflection of himself and his attitudes and his thing, but it's through this lens of just like a total fucking psychedelic trip. It was amazing. It's amazing. The Book of Revelation is an amazing book. I highly advise that everybody read this fucking book. Because it's fucking metal. Like, don't read it to be like, this is the one true prophecy. I truly believe in the things that I'm about to read. Like, read it in the way that you would read, like, Harry Potter. Like, read it in the way that you would read, like Twilight. Right? Like, I'm really trying to think of a piece of literature that'll make you, like, really deflate your expectations. And as soon as you sit down and read the Book of Revelations like that, you'll get, like, not even a chapter. You'll be, like, 5-6 verses in, and you'll be like, oh, this is fucking metal. Even the way he introduces it, he's like, I am John, and he's just like, okay, let's go. Putin ignores elections. I don't think he ignores elections. Like, I think the way that Russian politics works, we don't understand the world because we think that the way the world does politics, the way that we do politics is the way that everybody should do politics. And if anybody is doing politics in any other way, then it must be illegitimate, right? Like, we're the greatest country in the world. We're the greatest people in the world. We have the manifest destiny to rule the world. And if you don't look like us, then you're obviously inferior, right? That's the American ethos, right? So be a bit careful when you're analyzing other countries that you're not just slipping into that, because it's pervasive. It's a pervasive worldview. It's easy to fall into. So just because it's different doesn't mean it's bad. It just means they're doing things a little bit differently. Nor does it mean it's undemocratic, right? It just means that they're doing it a little differently. So, for example, in Russian politics, most politics happen kind of behind the scenes. Most politics happen in discussion behind the scenes, happen in discussion between organizations and groups, and they come to a consensus behind the scenes as groups, and they air their concerns in that way through those mechanisms. And once they reach that kind of consensus, they have the election, and the election is simply seen as a formalization of things they've already agreed upon, right? Like in the United States and Canada, we see election season as like different parties coming up and fighting one another, and media smear campaigns, and we're trying to convince huge swaths of the populace. Well, okay, take all of that, and then instead of doing it like out in the public for the entire fucking world to see with like this big rah 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 kind of stuff, it was just you having like going to places and having conversations with one another, and like actually discussing what's going on and having those disagreements with one another and trying to find compromises and coming to places where you can agree upon and all of that kind of stuff. Like, it's not that they're not doing politics, they're just not wagging their dick in front of your face while they're doing it. And so Putin especially gets criticized because it's like, well, he'll often run and there won't be any serious opposition. It's like, yeah, it's because they're doing their politics without their dick in your face, right? They're doing their politics in a different kind of way. It's not to say that there isn't opposition, right? There's an opposition party. The Communist Party is the opposition party. The whole story that they've concocted behind Navalny doesn't make any sense if Putin's just a dictator, right? Like there needs to be opposition. There needs to be opposition parties. And of course, the United States calls everybody an authoritarian dictator, right? And again, that stems from we're the greatest country in the world. How we do things is how everything should be done. If you deviate from what we think things should be, then you're an authoritarian dictator and all that kind of stuff. So near as I can tell, the word authoritarian means countries that pass laws and expect those laws to be followed. And because the United States doesn't expect anybody to follow any laws at any time, it sees people actually following laws as authoritarian, right? If you're a child, bedtimes are authoritarian, right? And then dictator, it's like, yeah, the leader actually says something and the people go, yeah, okay. Because we don't really understand the idea of leading by consensus, right? We don't understand the structure of the National People's Congress. We don't understand the structure, the worker council structure of Russia or the former Soviet Union, right? We don't understand any of that, and we don't try to understand them, right? Because we have this ethos and this mindset that says we're the greatest country in the world. The way we do things is the only way to do things. We're the front. We are the leaders of the world, and anybody that's doing anything different, it's because they're authoritarian dictatorship, blah, 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 blah. These are just buzzwords that don't really mean anything anymore, right? And like, and the more you learn about like Stalin, for example, like the classic dictator Stalin, right? The more you learn about this guy, the more you learn about the system that he was existing in, the ecosystem that he was existing in, you're like, he was a leader by consensus. He was part of a system of consensus building, right? And to pretend as though he wasn't, it's just sort of like, how could he have possibly, the narrative that people create about Xi Jinping, right? Xi Jinping's a dictator. Well, how is he maintaining power? With an iron fist and destroying opposition. Also, okay, is there any evidence of this? No. Oh, well then how is he actually the leader? Oh, he's a leader by consensus. Oh, okay, interesting. Isn't that democratic? Like, Sweden is an interesting country. It doesn't have as much oil as Norway, but it still has the same standards. Sweden has 57% of the whole wealth into state systems of public services and support. Yeah. Because the capitalist class was forced to concede power to workers in the face of a communist revolution. Like, that's how you end up with this stuff, actually. Right? You don't end up with this stuff because, like, oh, we just decided to be social democrats, and the capitalists were like, you know what? I think that is true and correct. It is right for us to all share the wealth together collectively. Because we are all social democrats, and we are nice to one another in social democracies. No. You had hordes of people outside the capitalist doors being like, if you don't do this, we're going to fucking overthrow you and seize the means of production. And the capitalists went, that's what happened, right? That's how politics actually works in the Western world. It doesn't work any other way. And the social democrats, I feel like, are the ones that have deluded themselves the most, because these are the guys that are standing around being like, Just make sure you vote blue no matter who, and we'll push them left, and we'll get more people into the Democratic Party, and those people will vote the way we want them to, and electoral politics, social democracy. No. No, you need thousands of people outside those people's doors saying, if you don't do what we're telling you to do, then we're going to overthrow this thing and we're going to do it ourselves. And if that threat's not credible, then your social democracy goes out the fucking window. Oh, yeah, I can't believe what they did to Chile and Iraq alone. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Pinochet, totally brutal. Like, people during the Iraq war, like under Bush, people were like, oh my God, Saddam, he's such a horrible person. Yeah, we funded him and we put him in power. Like, what, we're supposed to congratulate the Americans for getting rid of the guy that they put in power? What are you fucking talking about? Yeah, the Swedish workers have high wages, strong. Yeah, women have laws. Yeah, so on and so forth. Yeah. Look, you're going to keep saying all that stuff about Sweden and Finland and Norway and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to tell you exactly the same thing over and 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 over again. The system of capital in those countries is constantly working to regress those policies. Constantly. The capitalists are not your allies. They do not care about you. They are trying to destroy your country and abandon you. That is what they want to do. That is how they think, and it is what they are going to do. So the only way that you can actually defend yourself from these capitalists is A, be persistently vigilant, constantly aware that the capitalists are constantly trying to regress the society backwards into slavery, because that's the natural state of capitalism. Or get rid of these guys. Get rid of the capitalists. Right? Those are your two options. And I'm here to tell you that the be ever vigilant, constantly be aware and stand by is a losing strategy in the long term. It's a losing strategy in the long term. The capitalists will break you down. They will break it down. Right? That you manage to get your social democracy because of the threat of a revolution and the threat of revolutionary communism. Well, that threat is no longer there. And so the capitalists are doing everything they can to find cracks and everything they can to find a way to get into it, and they will. The chairman is speaking in Bushnell? I don't know what that means, man. Sorry. But good to see you. Oh, I feel like that has something to do with... Hold on. That has something to do with something that we were talking about. Maybe I would show that. Yeah. What is that? The American embittered anarchist still stewing over his mother's chastisements over their untidy bedroom. Yeah, just look at the final collapse of the social democratic model in Germany. Yeah. Like, social democracies are great until they're not. Right? And if you don't have a credible threat of a revolution, then they don't work. And they fall apart. Look at the economic changes in the Anglo world in the UK and the USA after the fall of the Soviet Union, yeah? After they had that credible threat. Yeah, no. Mabler, like, yes, that's the vigilance that I'm talking about, right? But we saw this happen in the United States, and it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a single day. It's not like one guy comes into power and eliminates everything all at once. I mean, sometimes that does happen. That's exactly what Milei did in Argentina. But it's more insidious than that. It's sneakier than that. It's a slow motion coup. It's a slow motion event, right? That's what happened in the United States. That's how they repealed the New Deal. That's how they repealed a lot of this stuff. They didn't come in and say, we're going to eliminate the entire policy and the entire program. They came in and they regressed it by 1%. and they regress this over here, and they went, okay, we'll undercut that, and we'll undercut this, and we'll take a little bit of that. And the people would grumble and get mad, and they would go, oh, and I'm gonna vote for the guy who's your opposition. I'm gonna vote Democrat and get rid of you because you regressed our society by 1%. Well, the other guy works for capitalists too, and he regresses the society another 1%. And then the next guy regresses it another 1%. And the next guy regresses it another 1%. And if you keep doing that year over year over year over year, over 50, 60 years, then your society has regressed 50, 60%. Right? So they don't do it all at once. It's a persistent policy change and a persistent... And the only way to defend yourself against it is every single time they try to regress something is to go completely nuclear every single time. And the public doesn't have the energy for that. It just doesn't. So eventually the capitalists win in the long term. They only have a reason to do so when it doesn't work well, but the public systems work really well in Sweden. Hence why this wouldn't work. I think you just misunderstand the mindset of the capitalists. Capitalists are vultures. They don't care about your public services. They don't care about anything being efficient. They don't care about that at all. There's 0% of them giving a shit about that even a tiny little bit. They want money for themselves. That's what they want. They're not interested in anything else. They're interested in money for themselves. And if that means that the public services fall apart, and if that means homelessness spreads, and if that means poverty spreads, and if that means well-being collapses, and if that means the birth rate collapses, then they're fine with that, right? They might look at it and be like, "Aw," but more money for them is all they care about. All they care about. Like, they do not give a shit at all about your efficient system. They're not looking at their society being like, what a well-run, efficient system that I am completely proud of. They're constantly looking at the society, asking themselves, how do I exploit these peasants and serfs so that I can make money from their misery? That's the mindset of a capitalist. That's all they think about. That's the only way they look at it, right? And which is why I think keeping them around is dangerous, and why I think that believing that social democracy is the answer is a huge, huge, huge mistake. A huge mistake. But the people choose and get to elect them. So you need to understand the concept of the dictatorship of capital, right? This is a communist term, comes out of the communist writings of Lenin, who understood very cleanly, like, yes, there is a pageant that gets put on where an election occurs, but you only get to choose between this capitalist or that capitalist, right? And so you vote for this capitalist, and this capitalist regresses the society a tiny little bit. I'll describe it actually in Canadian terms, because this is exactly how Canada works. That this here, where we're at here, this is the ratchet theory, okay? This is where the society is, okay? And people get disgruntled because the liberals said that the society would actually be there, but the society is here, and they've done nothing to actually move the society forward in any way. And so the conservatives come in and they regress the society. Okay? Then the liberals come in and they keep the society exactly there. Maybe they move it forward imperceptibly, right? We'll increase this policy by 1% over 10 years so that by 2040 it'll be an increase, right? And so they go like that. And if you do that over time, what you end up with is something that looks like this. Click, 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 click. Click, 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 click. And the entire time there was elections, and the entire time everybody was voting. But what you were voting for were two capitalist parties that work together, are both funded by capitalists specifically in order to go like this. Click, 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 until you find yourself in this position where we are at right now, right? Where we are on the precipice of descending directly into just overt, naked, outright fascism. We're literally committing genocides and just cooing whoever we want and overthrowing everybody. There's a major scuffle in Texas internally and all this kind of stuff. They're building a cop city in Georgia. Like yeah, they believe that privatizing and leaving competition will make it better. Yeah, they're frauds and liars, right? That's a very fraudulent bullshit way to believe anything. Like what privatization actually does, right? The moment you actually think about what privatization actually is, the more you realize that it's a completely bullshit scam on the face of it, right? Let's take something that's functional and works, right? And is actually beneficial and is actually cheap anytime we've studied it, right? Publicly funded systems and institutions like single payer healthcare are cheaper and more efficient, right? Let's take that system and let's attach onto it a group of people who do nothing but demand profits for themselves. And so you have to either increase prices to pay for these worthless parasites who provide no value whatsoever, or you need to cut costs, cut services, so make it less efficient. And every single time we've studied it, that has been the case, right? They're not introducing competition. They're just boiling themselves on the side of it and siphoning wealth away from it. That's what privatization actually is. It isn't this idea that like, I can run a more efficient model. No, you can't. If you could run a more efficient model, you would. Right? But you can't. Why can't you? Well, because you can't compete with the government. That's right. You can't compete with the government. If you could compete with the government, you would. But you can't. So fuck off. But instead what they do is they bribe politicians to pass legislation to allow them to boil onto the side of a functioning system and thereby degrade it. And a strategy that they use in order to con the public into believing that this is necessary to do is that they defund the system. So here in Ontario, they've been steadily defunding the healthcare system. So the healthcare system has stopped functioning very well, right? And then they say, the government can't do anything right. That's the problem. The government can't do anything right. It has nothing to do with their persistent defunding of the system, right, over decades. And then they turn around and say, yeah, we've got to open this up to competition. And what they mean is we need to boil ourselves on the side of it to siphon as much wealth away from the system for ourselves while doing nothing to help anybody, right? That's what's actually happening. That's what actually occurs. Like once you cut through the noise and through the propaganda and through the bullshit, it's what's happening in the long-term healthcare system here in Ontario. It's what happens when they try to privatize transit systems, right? You see a degradation of the service. You see it decline precipitously. It isn't like over time. It's like literally privatization. Why? Because they want to siphon as much wealth as they can away from it. It's like robbers robbing a bank, right? They're not going to do it slowly. They're just trying to get as much as they can before the jig is up, before people go, wait a minute now, hold on a second. I think that this thing was a scam, right? And if we were rational, we would say, hey, all of the stolen money that you stole from us, from this system, we're just going to tax that away from you and put it back into the system, right? That's what we would do if we were rational, but we're not. Like, we're not intelligent or rational, right? We keep giving these fraudulent, slaving liars chance after chance after chance, and thinking like they're a job creator, they're a fine, upstanding citizen. It's like a serf living in the kingdom of Prince John, being like, Robin Hood just needs to follow the law. I don't understand what's so difficult about that. You know, the king passes the law and you just need to follow the law. If Robin Hood wanted to help the citizens, he would just become a job creator himself. That's what he would do. Yeah, he would. He just needs to compete in the market of free ideas. Right? That's how stupid these guys sound. Like, Canada's dark descent seemed to begin at that time. Hold on. This is. I'm jumping into the middle of comment thing. Bethany says, "Did you know we lost 1 million people in the '90s in Canada?" I'm just learning this now. They left for the U.S. and other countries. Canada's dark descent seemed to begin at that time. If it was bad enough for 1 million to leave, then it was bad. I was way too young to understand as a child what was happening. Look, the neoliberal period was a disaster for the working class. Like, if we were living in a rational society, if we were living in a society that was actually organized along the lines for the benefit of the people, right? When the neoliberal period began, what we would have said, or when the industrialization of agriculture was completed, what we would have said is, we industrialized this sector that most of us were working in, right? In my father's time, my father's from Manitoba, right? I could give you my whole fucking family history if you like. My father's from Manitoba. And when he was a boy, 80% of the society was in agriculture. It took 80% of the society to make the food for the society. So everyone was involved in the process of agriculture. Well, now it's 2%. Because we automated it. We created a system of automation in order to automate the process of food production. So 2% of the society is involved. So that's a 78% decline in a single generation. And what we could have said right then, as a people, if we were rational and intelligent, is yeehaw. Now everybody can pursue the things that they think are important to pursue. Now we can spend our time in leisure, reading, researching, enjoying God's green earth and living in the world, enjoying each other, community building, focusing on community projects, focusing on building community and all of these things. Instead of that, we were told, nope, you got to sell a product. You got to sell a product. You got to become an entrepreneur. You got to sell a project. You got to sell a product. That's the only way that you can engage in the society. That's the only meaningful. And if you don't sell a product, then you don't get food and you don't get shelter. Right? So 78% of the society is told, well, you better stop doing agriculture and you better start selling a product. Right? This is what is meant when they say that unfettered capitalism is a revolutionary force. Right? So instead of everybody just having more free time and engaging with the agricultural system and the industrial sector to the degree that it was necessary, we all essentially turn into just car salesmen and latte salesmen, just flipping burgers for one another, instead of finding more efficient models to actually distribute this stuff in an equitable kind of a way. It's just total garbage. We're in this garbage society because of it, where we just produce trash and exhaust ourselves for fucking no reason at all. For like nothing, for like basic necessities, for basic food, basic shelter. We're just exhausting ourselves. It's just fucking ridiculous. Meanwhile, there are countries that are like, yeah, like, we want to be successful and build our productive capacity, but like, maybe let's be a bit rational about it. And like, in 20 years, these countries are going to be so far ahead of us, it's going to be silly. It's going to be silly. Like, we are going to look at these places, those of us that are capable of looking at these places. And we're just going to be like, oh yeah, like, we're silly. Like, this is silly, what we're doing and what we've done. Yeah, they gave us that excuse because they gave everything to the oligarchs. Yeah, I know they have plans for many cop cities all over. I'm not sure how far along most of it is yet, apart from the example one everybody knows about. Yeah, like, I'm more or less of the opinion that the Georgia cop city is the experiment, right? They want to see how fast they can get this built and how much resistance there is to it. And the answer is that they can actually get this built very fast with little resistance, right? Like, there's resistance, obviously, but like not as much as you think. Like it's not like the whole population of Georgia got up in arms and stormed the place. Right? So they're just going to pull the switch on it. And all of a sudden, in a single year, every state will have one of these. They'll just have a cop city. And it'll just become like a fort for the capitalist class to terrorize the public. Like, that's what it'll be. No one seriously believes everyone can be an entrepreneur. Yeah, they do. You should listen to these guys. Like the true believers, like the capitalist true believers, like Bethany, it pays to remember at this stage in the game, okay? At this stage in the game, you are not dealing with intelligent people, right? They sound intelligent, they seem intelligent, but what they have, what they're doing is rooting themselves in a religious ideology that they call capitalism. Right? And once you have rooted yourself in a religious ideology, then your worldview gets full of contradictions. Okay? So I'm going to really walk you through my theory of what this religious ideology looks like, because I think that gets said that it's a religious ideology, but it doesn't actually get explored from like a theological perspective, from an actual cultural religious perspective. And I do that. And there are three major pillars. I call it the dark trinity of the capitalist death cult, or the unholy trinity of the capitalist death cult, right? And the three pillars sound like this. Pillar number one, worship money, right? Money is God. Worship money. Be willing to exchange clean water, clean air, the freedom of people, friendships, relationships with your children, relationships with your wife, your husband. Be willing to destroy the land, be willing to destroy countries, be willing to murder people for invisible numbers that we invented in the first place. Okay? Number one, money is God, worship money. This is what they would call the profit motive, right? And you can encounter lots of capitalists who will defend the system of capital, the religion of capitalism, from this perspective. That if and a very simple one that everybody will say, well, if you remove the profit motive, what motivates people? People will just sit around and be lazy if they aren't pursuing money. That's a worship of money. You're like, really think about what a person is doing when they are saying that. They are putting sex, they are taking money and putting money ahead of sex as a motivator. They are putting laughter and enjoyment of life. They're putting money ahead of that. They're putting money ahead of adventure, exploration, curiosity, right? All of these very basic human things. Love, right? Love. They're putting money and the profit motive ahead of love. So this can be very clearly stated as a religious ideology, where they have taken a tool, or you could even call it a technological advancement, which is money, and instead of treating it as a tool, they elevate it into godhood, and they worship money as a god, to the degree that they're willing to pursue it, and they're willing to put it above love, sex, laughter, community, everything. Money. That's the number one thing. So a second pillar, and these pillars reinforce themselves and create a fundamentalist ideology, and I'll explain that too. I love talking about this. It's like probably my favorite subject. Second favorite. Religion is my favorite, but that's fine. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. The second pillar is the self, the worship of the self. That my experience and what I am experiencing is the most important thing that happens in the world. My subjective, very tiny worldview is actually universal. And the more money I have, the better person I am. And anything that happens that benefits me is an inherent good. Yeah, the cult of the self is another way of thinking of it. Yeah, and those tend to erect. And of course, how the measurement of one's value in a society is explicitly and exclusively done through money. So the person who has the most money has ascended the hierarchy, and there's a system of measurement that you get to say, where do I stand? How do I measure myself? Well, I measure myself according to how much money people have. So that's why people worship people like Elon Musk. He has so much money. He's naturally good. Everything he does, he's super smart and intelligent, right? And they imagine themselves as Elon Musk, right? And they pursue things in the world in order to become more like Elon Musk, even though the guy is a creepy fascist dumbass. And the the hyper individualization really takes root in the worship of the self. That all problems can be solved by more effort from you. So if you have a lot of money, it means that you are good. And if you have no money, it means that you are bad. It means that you've done something wrong, right? And all you have to do is fix you, because you are clearly the problem. So it's the antithesis of community. It's the antithesis of systems. It's the antithesis of history. It's the antithesis of reality and facts and evidence. None of those matter. The only thing that matters is what I've experienced with my eyes, right? So it doesn't matter if I was born with $100 million. That just means I'm good. It's not too much different from saying, God bore me to be the prince, and so I am destined to be the king. It's that same kind of thinking, and it's a religious perspective and a religious ideology. And of course, there's no society, right? There's only the self. There's only individuals operating in the world and negotiating with each other, right? So there's only the self. And of course, the self that has the most money is the best self, no matter how they got that money and no matter what they did to do it, right? So it's a type of, it's a way to worship a hierarchy. It's a way to worship monopolists and capitalists. And of course, it's a very convenient ideology for those who are born rich, right? If you're Galen Weston, or if you're David Thompson, or if you're Warren Buffett or something, it's a very convenient ideology, because you get to basically say, of course I'm good, I'm rich, right? And you should be like me, and you're just jealous. You're just envious, right? So it's the worship of the self. And then finally, the third pillar, I really struggled with this one for a while, but I feel like I finally landed on it. And when I did land on it, I was like, yeah, of course, that's what it is. The third pillar is the worship of chaos. The worship of chaos, which of course they will deny, but it's obviously what they're doing. Like, they'll deny it in the same way that Christian evangelicals will deny that they're actually a death cult. Like, they'll literally sing songs about how great everything will be once they're dead and in heaven. But if you say, like, that sounds like a fucking death cult, they'll deny it. In the same way, capitalists deny that they worship chaos and that they're actually like chaos death knights, right? When they say something like, the invisible hand of the market will decide, that is beseeching chaos. Let chaos reign and let the invisible hand decide are the same statement. They're just using different words. And they believe that if you allow a quote-unquote free market, as if such a thing exists, to operate in the society, that will have positive outcomes. And what's ironic about that belief, that religious belief, is that the only time any economist actually used the phrase "the invisible hand of the market" was Adam Smith in his writings, The Wealth of Nations, where he said, if you deregulate capitalism in a society, it will destroy that society as if by an invisible hand. So when Adam Smith said it, he said it that it would be very negative force and it would destroy the society. And it's the only time he used the phrase. And today's religious capitalists will use it as a way to defend the invisible hand of the market and to worship chaos, that the market will decide. We just need to let the market do it. So we need to deregulate more, and we need to get rid of all of this kind of stuff. And through that process of deregulation, right, the individuals who make the most money will become the new rulers of the society. Right? So it's a very kind of orcish way of thinking about things, right? Like orcs in the Warhammer universe, they decide who the leader is based on who the biggest and the strongest is, right? Just if you're the biggest and you can beat up the most people, then you are the leader. Well, this is how capitalists think. Oh, you're the one with the most money. Like you, in the system of chaos worship, you are the individual who has collected the most money. Therefore, you are the symbol of capitalism in the society. You are the godkin. You are the Jesus Christ Messiah born within the structure of the system of capital, right? You are the praetor or whatever. You're the pope or whatever title, the CEO, right? You're the CEO of capitalism. You're the guy. And this reinforces itself, right? This is a reinforcing structure. And of course it's lunacy. Like all religious fundamentalist ideologies, it's ridiculous. It's such a stupid worldview that's so easy to falsify. But because it has this self-reinforcing mechanism, and because it's so heavy on its own propaganda, and it's so far up its own ass, people believe it. And it's also a very self-flattering ideology. I think that's something. So if you're Ben Shapiro, right, and you've never actually worked a real job, you've basically have everything handed to you, you've only really debated little kids, you don't actually need to know anything, you're not very intelligent, you just know how to talk very fast, and you're kind of a stupid person, but you're surrounded by wealth and money, which you were born into. Well, it's a very self-flattering thing to say, I got where I am because I'm smart and intelligent and better than you. Right? It's a very self-congratulatory thing. So it's very rooted in selfishness and arrogance, which makes a lot of sense as these guys worship chaos. And I don't say the phrase chaos death knight lightly. Like these guys are literally causing a climate change catastrophe. Like they're literally saying while they're causing the catastrophe, climate change is not a science, it's a religion. Right? So the science of climate change and the study of climate change is a science, isn't a science, it's a religion. Okay, guys, whatever you say. Right? No, see, what's interesting about Ben Shapiro is that I think he's a true believer. Right? Like, I think he's a true believer. Like, when I discuss this system of capital, and when I discuss this trifecta, these three pillars, Ben Shapiro is really top of mind, right? It's him, and Jordan Peterson is also quite top of mind, because Jordan Peterson really laid out a lot of the groundwork, because he was so explicit, like he was so open about his fealty to the death cult, and how he believes that the death cult is good, and his discussion of hierarchies and the patriarchy and all this kind of stuff. A lot of the times it's incoherent because of its schizophrenia, but he still kind of lays the groundwork for it. And Peterson is also like, he's a little bit less of a true believer. I think he's a little bit more cynical, right? Which I think makes him a little bit more villainous. Like, Shapiro is a child, right? Like, there are many ways that people can grow up, right? There's physically, there is spiritually, and there's mentally. And I think that Shapiro grew up physically, he looks like a little boy, but, he grew up physically, okay. As we all do, that's unavoidable. And he grew up mentally, like clearly, he's a graduate from Harvard, right? But like spiritually and like emotionally is the better word to use. Emotionally, I think he's still about 12. I don't think he actually grew past being like daddy's good little boy or mommy's good little boy. I think he's basically 12, and that really shows because he keeps debating children, right? Like, I'm not gonna debate college kids, right? Like, if somebody asked me to do a debate and I found out that they were just like an 18-year-old kid in first year college, I'd be like, nah, you're free to listen to me. Like, you can come in here and you can listen to me. You can ask me questions, okay? But you don't know anything. Pretty clearly. You're an 18-year-old college kid, right? So for Shapiro to keep going around and keep having these quote-unquote debates with 18-year-old kids, it just like only a 12-year-old would think that that's an achievement. But it's exactly what he does. And then he puts this shit online and he expects people to be like, wow, what a smarty pants. He really dunked on that college kid. And every single time he stands in front of an adult, and every single time he walks into a room and there's a fucking adult there, and the adults sit down and they have an adult conversation, he ends up looking like a fucking clown. Because he is. Because he didn't grow up past 12. And that's what I think a lot of these capitalists are like. I think that a lot of these capitalists are very emotionally stunted and emotionally dead people. Peter Thiel, right? One of the richest people in America, a billionaire in America, funded the Trump campaign in the first run. Peter Thiel literally believes and funds technology in order to become immortal. He funds cryogenic technology so that when he dies or when he's near death, he'll be cryogenically frozen so that he can be revived and become immortal in the world. There's a great article in The Atlantic where he talks very openly about his desire and his wish to attain immortality and become immortal. Like, and I quote, the elves from the book The Lord of the Rings. Unquote. These people are emotional children that do not grow up because they gain a certain level of wealth and status and prestige and position where they're no longer the world no longer demands that they need to grow up, and they don't have there's no incentive for them to grow up because the system of capital stunts them, right? That they want to become intellectuals and they believe in some kind of intellectual growth, but emotional growth, that's gay. What are you talking about? You don't need to grow emotionally. You don't need to have wisdom, right? You don't need to be skeptical of your own position and your own upbringing. Obviously, you're good. You're rich, right? If the universe didn't think that you were good, then they would have made you poor, right? Because if you're poor, you're bad, and if you're rich, you're good, and you don't need to think any further than that. So Ben Shapiro in the BBC interview is still funny to this day. Yeah. He even told Andrew Near, I'm more popular than you. Yeah. No, I mean, Ben Shapiro recently had a debate with just some YouTuber. I forget his name. Not Destiny, because Destiny's also in this category of kind of being a child. He had a debate with, and they got into the conversation of religion. And the guy basically dunked on Shapiro the whole time. Like, very calmly. He wasn't, like, snide or rude. But he was just, like, dunking on Shapiro the entire time because Shapiro's position isn't really well thought out. Right? Shapiro believes he's a fundamentalist. He believes that a magic book tells him what's right and wrong, right? And that's the position of a child. And like, this is what's so funny about Ben Shapiro. It's like, the guy literally stands in front of you and says, I have a book that has magic in it that I think tells us what is the difference between right and wrong. Like, if somebody gave me like $100 million and said, you have to make a movie with this, you have to make a movie with this $100 million, and you've got to produce the movie and it's got to be good. The movie that I would make would be about a character living in a world in which everybody believed that the Harry Potter universe was true, and that the Harry Potter books were real. That Harry Potter and Dumbledore and Hagrid and Voldemort were real, actual historical figures that actually lived in the world at one point. And that the wizarding world is a real place that exists just beyond your perception, right? And if something strange or unusual happens, it must be because of the wizards that definitely exist and are real. And it would be about this character recognizing and realizing and coming to terms and waking up from the reality that this book, this Harry Potter book, that everybody is insistent that this is a historical documentary, is a fucking children's story, and that magic isn't real, and that there is no wizards, and that anything that can be gleaned from these stories are because of analogy and metaphor, right? That these are works of fiction designed to appeal to a person who is going through an internal journey. And that's what these books are. That's what these religious texts are, and that's what they're for. But to see a guy walking around being like, yeah, this is a historical documentary that has magic in it, and magic is real. And so what it says in this magical book, that's how we should actually live our lives. It's stupid. Like, how do you take a person seriously when they're walking around talking that way? It's a very dumb way to think. And I'm always blown away that Shapiro will sit down with somebody and the first thing that this person will say is like, so there's magic in your book, right? Like, that there's magic, right? Like, what, you think that this is a literal document that should be taken literal. What's with the magic that's in the book? And if Shapiro goes, well, obviously the magic is just storytelling. It's like, okay, well, if that's storytelling, then why isn't this storytelling? Why should I take this as sacred and true, written by God's hand, if not this? Unless you're actually trying to tell me that magic is real. In which case, I don't take you seriously at all. Because magic's not fucking real. Like, I'm blown away that people do not say this to this guy. Like, it just shocks me that nobody looks at Ben Shapiro and goes like, do you, like, if I were to tell you that Harry Potter is a real thing that happened, would you go along with that? No? Why not? Why not? Because magic's not real. Right. Like, it's buffoons have taken over the society, right? The people who have taken over the society are buffoonish. And the next generation that is coming up behind these buffoons will be even more buffoonish, right? Like, the people who are going to take the reins from Donald Trump, from Ben Shapiro, from Jordan Peterson, the next crop of people that are going to come behind this group are going to be even worse. They're going to be even stupider. They're going to be even more convinced. They're going to be heavier in their convictions. And they're going to know less, and they're going to be even more scared. Another religion noticed the competing religion thing a long time ago. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah, I don't even really put it in terms of like good or evil anymore. I just put it in the terms of like destructive or not, right? Like capitalism is obviously a destructive force. Like it obviously destroys. Anything it builds, it only builds to impress people enough to let them destroy something else, right? And the only time it ceases its destruction is when people stand up against it and demand it stop. But it's obviously a destructive force. It wants to expand, right? There are 4 phases of capitalism, right? Exploration, Christopher Columbus, exploration, expansion, exploitation, extermination, right? That's lifted straight from Civilization, 4X games. But it's absolutely true, right? Capitalists explore areas so that they can expand into those areas, so that they can exploit resources and people that live in those areas, and then eventually exterminate those people and any life in that area. That's how capitalism actually operates. Well, we've reached the end of this one. It is 9 o'clock. Glad to see that there's some new people in the chat. If you're still here, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bells, hit the whistles, do the stuff. More importantly than any of that, please be sure to tell people I exist. Spread the good word. Always remember, each and every one of us is a quantum being, walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are doing everything they can, spending hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.